Chapter 2883. Thunder Island Lord, you really want to fight me head-on? Tai Longding's eyes blazed with killing intent when he heard Nie Tian's words. The Tai family's secret technique he was using was called the Iron Dragon Robe. Once he used it, his aura would multiply. Therefore, his current battle strength was already terrifying. He wouldn't be afraid even if he faced a 9th stage half-saint head-on. But while the Iron Dragon Robe was powerful, it had a fatal weakness. It would greatly reduce a cultivator's speed. Tai Longding thought that Nie Tian didn't dare to face him head-on because he knew he was no match for him and could only dodge. Now that Nie Tian wanted to fight him head-on, it was exactly what he wanted. He was confident that he could kill Nie Tian in one move in a head-on battle. Are you excited? Nie Tian chuckled, his indifferent voice filled with disdain. Brat, the Tai family's Iron Dragon Robe is not something you can imagine. Tai Longding smiled coldly. In the next moment, his body trembled and his aura surged again. This guy was smart. He didn't use his full strength when he attacked just now, holding back some of his strength. He was waiting for Nie Tian to fight him head-on. Everyone looked at the two figures in the sky. They didn't expect Nie Tian to fight Tai Longding head-on. Originally, with Nie Tian's speed, he would be invincible. There was no need for a head-on battle. Isn't Lord Nie Tian too arrogant to fight Tai Longding head-on? Tai Longding is using the Tai family's secret technique. It's said that this secret technique can greatly increase one's battle strength. Can Lord Nie Tian really contend with the Tai family's secret technique? Lord Nie Tian shouldn't be so arrogant. The crowd discussed, their eyes trembling. They all felt that Nie Tian fighting Tai Longding head-on was an unwise decision. However, Nie Tian was extremely indifferent. Sword insight surged around him, and it was extremely restrained. He seemed like a beast that was in deep slumber and would erupt with its strongest killing intent at any moment. Nie Tian, it's your fortune to die to the Tai family's secret art. Tai Longding stared at Nie Tian with a cold expression, after which, he took a step forwards, causing the space around him to tremble as a surge of his bloodline power gushed forth. Boom! A terrifyingly sharp claw appeared in the sky. It was as majestic as a mountain and as sharp as a blade. It carried an extreme killing intent as it slashed towards Nie Tian. Nie Tian stood tall in the sky, like a rock that stabilized the sea in a storm, majestic and unmoving. When the black claws were less than 100 meters away from him, he moved. Hua! Nie Tian raised his arm and swung his sword with tremendous force. His movements were simple and plain, yet they revealed an overbearing aura that caused one's heart to palpitate. Boom! Following which, boundless sword intent condensed in the sky, forming a terrifying sword shadow that resembled a gigantic dragon. Boom! 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 The sword shadow was majestic and terrifying. In an instant it collided with the black claws, causing the sky to tremble and the black claws to shatter. No! Tai Longding's eyes trembled as he felt a terrifying force pressing down on him. His face paled as he screamed out in fear. He had never thought that Nie Tian's strength would be this terrifying. In his opinion, this was simply impossible. Is the figure standing before him really a second-rank half-saint martial artist? But it was already too late. The sword shadow whizzed downwards, engulfing Tai Longding's figure in an instant. This! The crowd below was completely dumbfounded, unable to believe their eyes. Nie Tian was too terrifying. After a long time, the sword intent in the sky dissipated and a bloody figure appeared in front of the crowd. It was Tai Longding. Fortunately, he had used the Tai clan's secret technique and was still alive. Why are you so strong? Tai Longding's body trembled uncontrollably. There was shock and confusion in his eyes, but most of all, there was fear, a fear that came from the bottom of his heart. It's not that I'm too strong, it's that you're too weak. Nie Tianling sneered as his silhouette flickered, appearing beside Tai Long Deng. What do you want? Tai Long Deng's eyes trembled as he felt Nie Tian's murderous intent. Tai Long Deng, I gave you a chance to leave, but you didn't cherish it. You can't blame me for what happens next. Nie Tianling sneered as sword intent gushed out from his body, enveloping Tai Long Deng. He didn't directly kill Tai Long Deng because he still had a use for him. After all, Tai Long Deng was Tai Chingfeng's son. Since Tai Long Deng failed to invite Hai Dachuan and Nie Tian, Tai Chingfeng would probably make a move himself. Nie Tian held Tai Long Deng's life in his hands. If Tai Chingfeng came, he would definitely be afraid. Lord, let's return to the island first. Nie Tian escorted Tai Long Deng to Hai Dachuan's side and said with a faint smile, "All right." Hai Dachuan glanced at Tai Long Deng and couldn't help but sigh. Although Tai Long Deng was defeated by Nie Tian and became a prisoner, the Ocean Dragon Island wouldn't be peaceful anymore. Tai Chingfeng, seeing that Tai Long Deng had yet to return, would definitely pay a visit personally. At that time, there would definitely be a huge battle. Hai Dachuan's gaze swept across Nie Tian. He knew that the fate of the Ocean Dragon Island depended on Nie Tian alone. Nie Tian. However, just as Nie Tian and Hai Dachuan were about to return to the Ocean Dragon Island, a voice rang out. "Let go of my senior brother Tai." Nie Tian's gaze froze. He suddenly turned around and saw a familiar face. Mu Lei. At that moment, a middle-aged man who looked similar to Mu Lei stood beside Mu Lei. He was staring at Nie Tian with a gloomy face. "Uncle Mu, save me." Tai Long Deng saw the middle-aged man and his eyes couldn't help but tremble. His eyes lit up and he shouted in surprise. The middle-aged man beside Mu Lei was none other than his father, the Lord of Thunderclap Island, Mu Tsiubing. Lord of Thunderclap Island. Hai Dachuan's eyes trembled when he saw Mu Tsiubing, and he cried out in surprise. He didn't expect Mu Tsiubing to appear at this time. "Lord of Ocean Dragon Island, how dare you let someone injure young master Tai Long Deng?" Mu Tsiubing's eyes darkened and he bellowed. Hai Dachuan was stunned and his expression was extremely ugly. "I am the one who injured Tai Long Deng." At that moment, Nie Tian took a step forward and looked at Mu Tsiubing from afar. He said, "I am also the one who injured your son. If you want revenge, come at me." Mu Tsiubing's expression froze when he heard Nie Tian's words. A murderous intent flashed in his eyes and he asked Nie Tian coldly, "You are Nie Tian?" "I am Nie Tian," Nie Tian replied indifferently. He then took a step forward and walked straight towards Mu Tsiubing. "Father!" Mu Lei's face turned pale when he saw Nie Tian walking towards him. He shouted and involuntarily took a step back. Chapter 2884. Chapter 2879. Chapter 2, 879. Bullying others. Farni Tian took a step forward and stopped 10,000 meters away from the Mu father and son duo. His eyes were cold but he did not speak. Mu Tsiubing, the Lord of Thunderclap Island, looked at Nie Tian and felt an indescribable fear in his heart. However, he regained his composure in the next moment and thought to himself, "Why would I be afraid? It must be an illusion. This kid is only a second-stage half-saint while I'm a seventh-stage half-saint. Why should I be afraid of him?" Mu Tsiubing actually sensed danger in front of Nie Tian, which puzzled him. He was the lord of an island and a seventh-stage half-saint. There was no reason for him to be afraid of a second-stage half-saint. "You're the Thunderclap Island lord?" At this moment, Nie Tian raised his brows and asked, "What brings you to Ocean Dragon Island?" Mu Tsiubing's eyes narrowed and he calmed down. "Nie Tian, I came to Ocean Dragon Island to bring a message to Lord Tai Chingfeng. I would like to invite you and Island Lord Hai Long to Nine Dragons Island." Mu Tsiubing could restrain his aura when he spoke and did not reveal any arrogance. "Humph." Upon hearing Mu Tsiubing's words, Nie Tian chuckled. Then, he looked at Tai Long Deng, pointed at the latter and said, "Lord of Thunderclap Island, do you think you're stronger or weaker than Tai Longdeng?" Mu Tsubing looked at Nie Tian and his eyes narrowed. How could he not tell that Nie Tian's words were a blatant threat? However, he had indeed thought about Nie Tian's question. He was the Thunderclap Island Lord and was a 7th stage half-saint. Tai Longdeng was the number 1 genius of 9 Dragons 100 Islands and was a 5th stage half-saint. If it was a life-and-death battle, he might not be a match for Tai Longdeng. After all, Tai Longdeng had the Tai family's secret technique. He was very confused about how Nie Tian, with his strength, had defeated Tai Longdeng and even beaten him up so miserably. Looks like the Thunder Island Lord feels that he's no match for Tai Longdeng. Seeing that Mu Tsubing was silent, Nie Tian smiled faintly and said, "Even Tai Longdeng couldn't invite me. Do you think you can?" As he spoke, Nie Tian stared at Mu Tsubing with contempt. Actually, he always had a question in his heart. Why were the martial artists of the edge of the Bitter Sea so weak? Hai Dachuan and Mu Tsubing were the masters of an island, but they were only half-saints. With such strength, they could only be outer disciples in the Saint Soul Academy. Even the number 1 genius of the 9 Dragons 100 Islands, Tai Longdeng, was only a 5th rank half-saint. The shore of the Bitter Sea was in the Sacred Soul domain. It was really strange that the strength of the martial artists here was so low. How could Nie Tian know that the entire horizon of the Sea of Misery was enveloped by an energy called the Sea of Misery Restriction? The martial artists of the shores of the Bitter Sea were born with the Bitter Sea Restriction within their bodies. This was also the reason why their strength was not suppressed by the Bitter Sea Restriction. However, although the Sea of Misery Restriction allowed the martial artists of the shores of the Bitter Sea to be free from the suppression of the Bitter Sea Restriction, it suppressed their martial bodies and talents. Moreover, the stronger one was, the more obvious the suppression of the Sea of Misery Restriction would be. It was just like the people of the Dragon Rebel clan, who were born with the Shadow Restriction within their bodies and could not improve their strength. Most of the martial artists of the Eye of the Bitter Sea were below half-saints. Only the genius martial artists could reach half-saint. However, even the top geniuses only had the strength of a 9th rank half-saint. Only the monstrous martial artists could break through to the demi-saint realm, and even then, they would only be low-level demi-saint. It was rumored that the strongest person in the history of the shore of the Bitter Sea was only a 5th rank demi-saint. When Mu Tsubing heard what Nie Tian said, his old face became uglier than if he had eaten shit. "Thunder Island Lord, you should leave. If Tai Chingfeng really wants to see me, let him come himself." Nie Tian smiled faintly and turned around, ready to leave. He was still thinking about the volcano on the Sea Dragon Island, and did not have time to waste with Mu Tsubing. "Nie Tian, you came to the shore of the Bitter Sea for Manjusaka, didn't you?" Mu Tsubing's eyes trembled as he suddenly asked. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed and he stopped moving. It was not strange that Mu Tsubing knew that he came for Manjusaka. Before this, Hai Dachuan had also guessed Nie Tian's purpose for coming to the shore of the Bitter Sea. But the strange thing was, why would Mu Tsubing mention Manjusaka all of a sudden? Could it be that he knows news about Manjusaka? "Nie Tian, it seems that you really came for Manjusaka." Mu Tsubing laughed when he saw that Nie Tian had stopped moving and said, "If I tell you that Lord Tai Chingfeng knows where Manjusaka is, would you be willing to go to 9 Dragons Island? Is what you said true?" Nie Tian's eyes narrowed and a Manjusaka appeared in his eyes as he asked coldly. "Of course." Mu Tsubing nodded as a strange light flashed in his eyes. Nie Tian's eyes were shining brightly as he stared at Mu Tsubing. He was thinking about how much of what Mu Tsubing said was true. "Alright, I'll go with you to 9 Dragons Island." After a while, Nie Tian's eyes flickered as he said in a deep voice, "My little friend Nie Tian. Big brother Nie Tian." Hai Dachuan and the Sea Dragon King shouted at the same time as he finished speaking. It was obvious that they did not want him to go to Nine Dragons Island. Lord Island, Brother Dragon King, I know what I'm doing. Nye smiled faintly as his eyes revealed an overbearing confidence. Although he said so, he was not sure if this trip to Nine Dragons Island would be a blessing or a curse. Nye, bring young Master Tai Long Deng along. Let's go. Mu Tsubing smiled and was about to leave. Wait. Nye laughed and said, leave the hostage behind. Hostage? Mu Tsubing was stunned and did not react for a moment. Nye smiled faintly as he pointed at Mu Lei. Nye, what do you mean by this? Mu Tsubing then realized that Nye wanted Mu Lei to stay as a hostage. He was furious. Obviously, Nye did not intend to bring Tai Long Deng to Nine Dragons Island. Am I not clear? With these words, Mu Lei and Tai Long Deng will be the hostages. With a faint smile, Nye moved and walked directly towards Tai Long Deng. Father, save me! Mu Lei was so scared that his face turned green as he shouted. He did not want to stay as a hostage. Nye, don't go too far. Mu Tsubing stepped forward and stood in front of Mu Lei. He said Nye coldly. It was fine that Nye did not release Tai Long Deng, but he even wanted to keep Mu Lei. This was too much. I'm sorry, I just like to go too far. Nye smiled faintly and said, and I especially like to bully people like you. As he spoke, sword will surged all over his body. His sword aura soared into the sky, sharp and murderous. Mu Tsubing felt Nye aura and his heart sank. Unconcealable fear appeared in his eyes. He glanced at Tai Long Deng and finally nodded. He did not dare to fight Nye. Very well. With a faint smile, Nye figure flickered, and he reached out with his hand, grabbing the wood thunder. He released several sword wills around him and sealed Mu Lei's vital meridians. Sword Chi Sealing Meridians. Chapter 2885. You want to kill me? Hai Dachuan looked at Nye and nodded solemnly. Of course. He understood that the Sea Dragon Island was only able to hold on until now because of Nye. If something were to happen to Nye on this trip to Nine Dragons Island, the Sea Dragon Island would definitely be destroyed. Then, Nye let Cher and Xiao Ye enter the Nine Extremities. He wanted to leave the two of them on Sea Dragon Island, but he felt that it was safer to bring them along. After that, Nye did not waste any time and left with Mu Tsubing. Of course, Hai Dachuan did not leave but stayed on Sea Dragon Island. About half an hour later, Nye and the others arrived above a vast island. Nye, this is Nine Dragons Island, Mu Tsubing said faintly as he looked at the island below. Nye nodded without saying a word. Nine Dragons Island was much bigger than Sea Dragon Island, but it looked barren and lifeless. Mu Tsubing moved and entered Nine Dragons Island, with Nye following closely. At this moment, two martial artists in black appeared. After seeing Mu Tsubing, they said respectfully, Lord Mu, Lord Tai Ching-fong is waiting for you in the conference hall. Mu Tsubing smiled faintly and gestured for the two to lead the way. After a while, Nye and Mu Tsubing arrived at the conference hall of Nine Dragons Island. Brother Mu, you're back. At this moment, a hearty laughter sounded in the hall. Then, a figure walked out with a smile on his face. Nye looked at the person who came. It was a middle-aged man with a burly body and resolute facial features. He looked somewhat similar to Tai Long Deng. He guessed that the person in front of him should be Tai Long Deng's father, the Lord of the Nine Dragons Sea, Tai Ching-fong. Brother Tai, you're here too, Mu Tsubing smiled and said faintly. When Nye saw Mu Tsubing's attitude towards the newcomer, he could not help but narrow his eyes. He found it strange that Mu Tsubing did not seem to be overly respectful towards Tai Ching-fong. The two of them seemed to be on equal footing. Brother Tai, please come inside. Big brother is waiting for you. The man laughed and dodged past Mu Tsubing. Then, his gaze landed on Nye. His expression turned cold and he said, Are you the one who injured Mu Lei? My name is Nie Tian. Nie Tian nodded and said cold. That person's eyes darkened and then he sneered. Brat, you do have some character. Then, they entered the meeting hall. At this time, Nie Tian saw a middle-aged man sitting on the main seat in the conference hall. His appearance was very similar to the middle-aged man from before, but he had a deep voice and appeared very scholarly. Island Lord Mu, second brother, please take a seat. The man took a sip of tea, put down the teacup, and said with a faint smile. Nie Tian was stunned for a moment before he realized that the person standing beside him was not Tai Chingfeng, but Tai Chingfeng's second brother. The person sitting on the main seat was the Lord of the Nine Dragon Sea, Tai Chingfeng. It turned out that the person standing beside Nie Tian was Tai Chingfeng's younger brother, Tai Qingyun. Mu Tsubing and Tai Qingyun responded and sat on the left and right side. Are you Nie Tian? Only then did Tai Chingfeng's gaze land on Nie Tian as he asked with a cold smile hanging on the corner of his mouth. After Mu Lei was injured by Nie Tian, he did not return to Thunderclap Island. Instead, he went to Nine Dragons Island. After that, Tai Longdeng and the others went to Sea Dragon Island. Therefore, Tai Chingfeng and the others had some understanding of Nie Tian. However, they only knew that Nie Tian had injured Mu Lei. They did not know that Nie Tian had almost killed Tai Longdeng. Tai Chingfeng originally thought that Nie Tian was an outsider. He did not expect that the latter only had the strength of a second-stage half-saint. He really did not know how Nie Tian defeated Mu Lei under the suppression of the Sea of Agony restriction. Yes. Nie Tian responded indifferently and did not say much. Brother Mu, where are Long Deng and Mu Lei? At that moment, Tai Qingyun suddenly reacted and asked Mu Tsubing in surprise. Mu Tsubing looked embarrassed and did not dare to hide anything. He told him about how Tai Longdeng and Mu Lei were held hostage by Nie Tian on Sea Dragon Island. How dare you! Just as Mu Tsubing finished speaking, Tai Qingyun stood up and roared. He stared at Nie Tian and shouted, "Little brat, how dare you injure the young lord of the Nine Dragon Sea and detain him on Sea Dragon Island? Are you tired of living? You want to kill me?" Nie Tian raised his eyelids and glanced at Tai Qingyun. His voice was very calm, but it made him look even more provocative. To be honest, he did not take Tai Qingyun seriously at all. He had long sensed that Tai Qingyun was a level 9 demi-saint, which was 7 levels higher than him. Although this was the Sea of Misery Horizon, Nie Tian knew that a level 9 demi-saint was no match for him. Nie Tian had also sensed Tai Chingfeng's strength, which turned out to be a level 1 demi-saint. Tai Chingfeng was a Sea Lord, but he was only a level 1 demi-saint, which surprised Nie Tian. He did not know that Tai Chingfeng's strength was already considered a top-notch expert in the entire Sea of Misery Horizon. Because of the existence of the Sea of Agony restriction, the strongest Sea Lords of the Sea of Misery Horizon were only around level 3 demi-saint. If Nie Tian had known that Tai Chingfeng was a level 1 demi-saint, he would not have detained Tai Longdeng and Mu Lei on Sea Dragon Island. Although it was not easy to defeat a level 1 demi-saint in the Sea of Misery Horizon, but Nie Tian believed that he had the ability to protect himself. "Brat, how dare you ignore me?" When Tai Qingyun saw that Nie Tian only glanced at him, he immediately flew into a rage. With a roar, he actually wanted to attack Qingyun. But at that moment, Tai Chingfeng suddenly spoke and stopped Tai Qingyun. "Brother, this brat is too insolent." Tai Qingyun looked up at Tai Chingfeng and said unwillingly, "Calm down first." Tai Chingfeng waved his hand and gestured for Tai Qingyun to sit down. Although Tai Qingyun was very reluctant, he still sat down. "Nie Tian, did you really defeat Tai Longdeng?" Then, Tai Chingfeng stared deeply at Nie Tian, his eyes flickering as if he was looking for something. If not for Mu Tsubing's testimony, he would not have believed that Nie Tian could defeat Tai Longdeng. "Humph," Nie Tian smiled faintly and said, The secret technique of your Tai family, the Iron Dragon shirt, is just so. When Tai Ching-fong and Tai Ching-yun heard Nie Tian's words, their eyes froze at the same time, and their faces turned ugly. Nie Tian had actually mentioned the secret technique of the Tai family, the Iron Dragon shirt. This undoubtedly meant that Tai Longdeng was defeated by Nie Tian after he used the Iron Dragon shirt. But how was that possible? With Tai Longdeng's strength, once he used the Iron Dragon shirt, even a level 7 demi-saint from the Eye of the Bitter Sea would not be a match for him. And Nie Tian was just a level 2 demi-saint from the outside world. Brat, you must have used some insidious means to ambush Tai Longdeng. In the next moment, Tai Ching-yun reacted and roared. His whole body's aura was released, and the entire meeting hall shook. Chapter 2886. A secret passage in the Nine Dragons Islands conference hall. Nie Tianling looked at Tai Ching-yun with disdain. He even put Tai Ching-yun in his eyes. How could he lose to Tai Longdeng? Little bastard, you're really courting death. Tai Ching-yun could no longer restrain the anger in his body. With a roar, a large hand suddenly stretched out. Suddenly, a wild force whizzed out and grabbed at Nie Tian. This was the conference hall, after all. Tai Ching-yun was a little hesitant and didn't use his full strength. However, the power that he suddenly erupted was enough to kill a low-level half-saint. However, the corners of Nie Tian's mouth curled up into a cold smile. He took a step forward, and the stone slabs on the ground immediately turned into dust. Then, a sword intent surged out, directly shattering the violent force that was rushing towards him. Boom! The void suddenly trembled, followed by a deathly silence. Tai Ching-fong and Mu Wubing's eyes were lifeless and their faces were stiff like two wooden statues. Obviously, they were extremely shocked. As for Tai Ching-yun, he was even more dumbfounded. His eyes stared at Nie Tian, but he couldn't make a sound. Just like that, Nie Tian had blocked his attack with his sword intent. How was this possible? After a moment of silence, Nie Tian said with a cold smile, "Humph, is this your strength? This is impossible." Only now did Tai Ching-yun come to his senses. He was shocked and said in shock. With his strength, he couldn't threaten Nie Tian at all. This was impossible. Ching-yun, you step down first. Tai Ching-fong calmed down a lot and signaled Tai Ching-yun to calm down. Then, he looked at Nie Tian with a much calmer expression and stood up. He cupped his hands and said, "Little brother Nie Tian, your strength is indeed powerful. This Tai has opened my eyes." Nie Tian's eyes suddenly narrowed, his face was filled with doubt. He couldn't figure out why Tai Ching-fong suddenly became so polite. Although the strength that he revealed was very strong, it wasn't strong enough to intimidate Tai Ching-fong. Tai Ching-fong's change in attitude was strange. "Territory Lord Tai, if you have something to say, just say it." Nie Tian's eyes flashed. He didn't want to talk nonsense with Tai Ching-fong. "Little brother Nie Tian, please sit." Tai Ching-fong extended his hand, gesturing Nie Tian to sit. Nie Tian did not stand on ceremony and directly sat beside Tai Ching-yun. He looked straight at Tai Ching-fong, wanting to know what the latter was up to. "Little brother Nie Tian, you've come to the Sea of Misery Horizon for an item, right?" Tai Ching-fong's eyes were suffused with a blazing light as he looked at Nie Tian and asked, "Manjasaka." Nie Tian didn't put on an act and said directly, "I heard from Island Lord Mu that Domain Lord Tai knows where Manjasaka is, right?" Tai Ching-fong's gaze froze, and he could not help but look at Mu Tsubing. He finally knew why Tai Longdeng could not invite Nie Tian, but Mu Tsubing could invite Nie Tian. It turned out that Nie Tian came because of the news of Manjasaka. "Yes." Tai Ching-fong nodded, and a strange smile appeared on his face. He said, "I do know where Manjasaka is." "Where?" Nie Tian's gaze froze, and he asked. "Cloud Buddha Peak of the Cloud Buddha Sea region." Tai Ching-fong's mouth twitched and he said with a blazing gaze. Nie Tian, however, frowned and his face darkened. Manjusaka belonged to the Cloud Buddha sect, and the Cloud Buddha sect lived in seclusion at the Cloud Buddha Peak. Tai Ching-feng saying that Manjusaka was at the Cloud Buddha Peak was equivalent to saying nothing. Hai Dachuan already said that the entire Cloud Buddha Sea region was a forbidden area of the Sea of Misery horizon. The Cloud Buddha Peak was the core area of the Cloud Buddha Sea region. How could it be so easy to approach? Tai Ching-feng, of course, knew what Nie Tian was thinking. He chuckled and said, "Little brother Nie Tian, I know a secret passage to enter the Cloud Buddha Peak." Really? Nie Tian's gaze froze again, and his eyes revealed an uncontrollable burning desire. The Cloud Buddha Peak was a forbidden area among forbidden areas, and it was hard to approach. However, if Tai Ching-feng knew the secret passage to enter the Cloud Buddha Peak, then it was different. Of course. Tai Ching-feng nodded heavily and said, "How could I joke about this kind of thing? Region Lord Tai, why are you telling me such an important thing?" Nie Tian's face sank and he calmed down a lot as he asked in a deep voice. Of course, he knew that Tai Ching-feng would not easily tell him where the secret passage was. He was very curious as to why Tai Ching-feng would tell him this. "Little brother Nie Tian, I want to make a deal with you." Tai Ching-feng laughed, and his eyes stared straight at Nie Tian. "A deal?" The corner of Nie Tian's mouth twitched, and he said with a smile, "Let's hear it." Tai Ching-feng's eyes flickered, and he said, "Little brother Nie Tian, I am willing to tell you where the secret passage is, but you have to bring us into the secret passage to find Manjusaka. If we really find Manjusaka, we'll split it evenly, how about it?" "Haha, no problem." Nie Tian looked at Tai Ching-feng's incomparably greedy appearance and couldn't help but laugh, and he said, "Region Lord Tai, do you think I'm a 3-year-old child? If there really is a secret passage, you would have gone there yourself. You don't need to wait for me, right?" "Little brother Nie Tian, you don't know." Tai Ching-feng had long guessed that Nie Tian would have such a question, so he forced a smile and said, "The secret passage I'm talking about is at the bottom of the Bitter Sea. Every cultivator in the Bitter Sea horizon is born with a Bitter Sea restriction inside their body, and this restriction power comes from the depths of the Bitter Sea horizon. If we enter the secret passage, we will trigger the Bitter Sea restriction inside our bodies. At that time, I'm afraid we will be suppressed to death by the restriction inside our bodies before we can even enter the Cloudy Buddha Peak." Tai Ching-feng looked at Nie Tian and said, "You're a foreign cultivator, so you don't have the Bitter Sea restriction inside your body. Even if you enter the bottom, you will only have to bear more of the Bitter Sea restriction power. Your strength will only be suppressed, but it won't be fatal." "So that's how it is." Nie Tian finally understood after hearing this. He faintly smiled and said, "You want me to help you resist the restriction inside your bodies after entering the secret passage, right?" "Yes." Tai Ching-feng nodded heavily. "One more question." Nie Tian smiled. Then, his eyes darkened as he asked, "Why do you want Manjusaka?" "Manjusaka is the immemorial sacred flower. After taking it, it can remove the Bitter Sea restriction in our bodies." Tai Ching-feng's eyes flickered, and he said in a deep voice, "It's because the people of the Cloudy Buddha clan have taken Manjusaka that they are not suppressed by the Bitter Sea restriction power." The corner of Nie Tian's mouth twitched and his eyes flickered. He didn't expect that Manjusaka would have such power. It seemed that this immemorial sacred flower was more terrifying than he had imagined. "All right, I agree to your conditions." Nie Tian faintly smiled and said, "Now can you tell me where the secret passage you mentioned is?" Tai Ching-feng's eyes sank and he looked at Nie Tian for a long time, seemingly confirming that the latter was a man of his word. In the end, he chose to believe in Nie Tian and said in a deep voice, "The secret passage is on the Sea Dragon Island." Chapter 2887. Chapter 2882. Chapter 2, 882 Compass Map. Nie Tian's expression changed when he heard Tai Ching-feng say that the secret passage to the Cloudy Buddha Peak was on the Sea Dragon Island. He immediately thought of the volcano that had just erupted not long ago that the Sea Dragon King mentioned. Originally, he wanted to take a look at the volcano, but Tai Longding's sudden arrival prevented him from doing so. Little brother Nie Tian, it seems like you have guessed it. Tai Qingfeng couldn't help but smile when he saw Nie Tian's strange expression and said, "That's right, the secret passage is inside the volcano on the Sea Dragon Island." Indeed. Nie Tian's eyes slightly trembled with a surprised expression. He was right. That volcano was the secret passage to the Cloudy Buddha Peak. No wonder Tai Qingfeng and the others wanted to take down the Sea Dragon Island so much. It was to enter the Cloudy Buddha Peak. Territory Lord Tai, the eruption of the Sea Dragon Island's volcano wouldn't be related to you, right? Nie Tian looked at Tai Qingfeng with a strange glint in his eyes and asked. The eruption of the Sea Dragon Island's volcano has nothing to do with me. It's just that I have predicted that the volcano on the island will erupt in the near future. Tai Qingfeng laughed and pretended to be profound. Predicted? Nie Tian smiled and asked, "How did Territory Lord Tai predict it?" Tai Qingfeng laughed but didn't answer. Instead, he said, "Little friend Nie Tian, after we enter the volcano, I will naturally tell you everything." "All right." Nie Tian nodded and said, "Then let's go now." It was obvious that Tai Qingfeng didn't completely trust Nie Tian. However, Nie Tian didn't care as he didn't trust Tai Qingfeng either. Tai Qingfeng was naturally happy to see that Nie Tian was about to go and immediately stood up. He made some arrangements to temporarily hand over the 9 Dragon Seas matters to Tai Qingyun and then followed Nie Tian back to the Sea Dragon Island with Mu Wubing. Soon, Nie Tian and the others returned to the Sea Dragon Island. However, after they entered the sky above the Sea Dragon Island, they immediately felt that something was wrong. The Sea Dragon Island was dead silent, and the air was filled with a bloody smell. Tai Qingfeng. At this moment, a low and deep voice rang out. Following that, a figure appeared, exuding a powerful aura. He stepped through the air and was extremely domineering. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed as he looked at the newcomer. It was a martial artist with an extremely imposing physique. His entire body was covered in thick hair, bulging muscles, and brimming with power. More importantly, he had the ability of a second-stage demi-saint. A second-stage demi-saint was even stronger than Tai Qingfeng. Could it be that this fellow was also a Sea Lord? Turu. Tai Qingfeng looked at the person in front of him and his eyes narrowed slightly. Although he was trying his best to remain calm, he still seemed very flustered. He didn't expect that Tu Lu, the master of the 8 secret oceanfront, would appear here. At this moment, Tu Lu's eyes were surging with killing intent, and his body was filled with the smell of blood, as if he had just killed someone. Tai Qingfeng, you seem to be very nervous. Tu Lu smiled coldly, with a hint of playfulness in his eyes. Tu Lu, this is the 9 Dragon Sea. What are you doing here? Tai Qingfeng calmed down a lot and reprimanded coldly. Between the various seas of the Sea of Misery, there was usually not much contact. The 8 secret oceanfront, where Tu Lu resided, was close to the 9 Dragon Sea, and there were very few exchanges between the two seas. As the master of the 8 secret oceanfront, Tu Lu's sudden appearance in the 9 Dragon Sea was obviously not simple. Tai Qingfeng, do you think you're the only one who knows about the secret passage? Tu Lu asked with a sly smile. Tai Qingfeng's eyes trembled, and he immediately shouted, What secret passage? I don't know what you're talking about. Humph. Tu Lu sneered and stretched out his hand. A black compass appeared in his hand and a map was engraved on the surface of the compass. A compass map. Tai Qingfeng's expression changed abruptly when he saw the compass in Tu Lu's hand. Humph. Tu Lu smiled again and said, Tai Qingfeng, I bet you didn't expect that I also have a compass map. How is this possible? Tai Qingfeng was shocked and asked, Why do you have a compass map? Humph. Tu Lu sneered and said, Don't you know? There are a total of 108 compass maps. When the Cloudy Buddha clan took control of the Sea of Misery, they gave the 108 compass maps to the Lords of the Sea of Misery. The compass map shows the distribution of all the islands in the Sea of Misery, and it even hides the secret passage to the Cloudy Buddha Peak. If you don't know about this, it seems like your previous master didn't tell you. Ah! Tulu laughed out loud after he finished speaking. This. Tai Ching-Fong was dumbfounded and stood rooted to the ground. The previous lord of the 9 Dragon Sea was his master, who had been dead for tens of thousands of years. Before his master passed away, he had given him the compass map and told him that it was something passed down from generation to generation among the lords of the sea, so he had to keep it safe. He thought the compass map was unique to the 9 Dragon Sea, but it turned out that all 108 lords of the sea had a compass map. Didn't this mean that all the lords of the Sea of Misery knew that there was a secret passage leading to the Cloudy Buddha Peak on the Ocean Dragon Island? This. Tai Ching-Fong inhaled deeply when he thought of this. He did not expect this to be the case. Tai Ching-Fong, hurry up and hand over your compass map. At this moment, Tulu took a step forward and coldly said, Impossible. Tai Ching-Fong's expression changed as he growled, The compass map belongs to the 9 Dragon Sea. Why should I give it to you? Because my fist is bigger. Tulu smiled cold and took a step forward. His aura was unleashed, causing a terrifying force to surge in the air. Nie Tian narrowed his eyes. He could sense that Tulu was far stronger than Tai Ching-Fong. Tulu, don't push me too far. Tai Ching-Fong growled in the face of the sudden change. He was not afraid at all. His cultivation was indeed a little weaker than Tulu's, but he knew that it would not be easy for Tulu to defeat him. You want to fight me? Tulu sneered. His gaze towards Tai Ching-Fong was filled with undisguised contempt. Let's fight then. Why would I be afraid of you? Tai Ching-Fong growled and took a step forward. You overestimate yourself, Tulu roared. Immediately after, terrifying golden runes were released from his body, condensing into 1,000-meter-long golden armor around him, making him look like a diamond. Nie Tian could not help but narrow his eyes and change his expression when he sensed Tulu's aura. Tulu was certainly frightening. His presence alone did not pale in comparison to a demi-saint who was a 3rd or 4th saint. Iron Dragon Robe. Tai Ching-Fong's eyes darkened and he immediately used a secret technique of the Tai family. Black gas surrounded his body and the huge Iron Dragon Robe wrapped around his body. Chapter 2888. You deserve to die. Boom. Boom. In the void, 2 violent auras rose and bloomed, oppressing the void as though it was going to tear the space apart. Before Nie Tian retreated 1,000 meters, he focused his gaze and saw more than a dozen martial artists in black standing in the void far away. Their bodies were extremely majestic, like bulls. One look and one could tell that they were from the 8 secret territorial waters. These people watched from afar and did not plan to intervene. They seemed to be very confident in their territorial waters, Lord Tulu. Mu Tsubing retreated even further, fearing that he would be affected by the upcoming battle. Come on! High up in the sky, Tulu roared and took a step forward. His aura bloomed like a stormy sea and blasted towards Tai Ching-Fong. Why would I be afraid of you? Tai Ching-Fong roared and the power of the Iron Dragon shirt burst out. The air was filled with terrifying black gas, like a dark cloud roaring crazily. Bang! In the void, the 2 auras collided with each other and there was a muffled sound like thunder. The space suddenly trembled as though it was going to explode. Tai Ching-Fong's body swayed and he could not help but take a few steps back. It was obvious that in a battle of absolute strength, even if he used the Iron Dragon shirt, he was still slightly weaker than Tulu. Seeing this, the golden runes around Tulu's body immediately became violent. He stepped in the air aggressively and directly punched out with both his fists. 2 golden fist shadows whizzed out like angry thunder, setting off a golden wave in the air and bombarding Tai Ching-Fong. Tai Chingfeng's eyes narrowed and revealed a bit of panic. He obviously did not expect Tu Lu's strength to be so strong. Boom! Boom! Two fist shadows fell and blasted on Tai Chingfeng's iron dragon shirt. He was forced to retreat for a few thousand meters, and there were actually two huge holes on the iron dragon shirt. Before Tai Chingfeng could stabilize his body, Tu Lu actually rushed over again. Tu Lu was very smart and wanted to directly defeat Tai Chingfeng. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. Above the sky, terrifying sounds kept ringing. Waves of violent waves kept crashing. The golden runes and black runes clashed with each other, extremely violent. Everyone could tell that Tai Chingfeng was being suppressed by Tu Lu in the fight. According to the current situation, Tai Chingfeng would definitely be defeated in a few more moves at most. In the distant void, the warriors of 8 mystic territorial waters smiled, as if they could already see the scene of Tu Lu defeating Tai Chingfeng. On the other hand, Mu Tsubing's expression was as ugly as if he had just eaten **T. If Tai Chingfeng was defeated, it would be hard for him to escape death. However, his strength was too weak and could not help Tai Chingfeng at all. If he took action, he would instead become a burden. At this moment, Mu Tsubing couldn't help but look at Nie Tian, and he seemed to be waiting for the latter to make a move. But he felt that it was impossible because Nie Tian was only a second-rank half-saint martial artist. Nie Tian's eyes flickered as he stared at the battle in the sky. He was contemplating whether he should intervene or not. To him, it really didn't matter who won or lost this battle. After all, Tu Lu and Mu Tsubing both had the compass map in their hands. No matter which one of them wanted to enter the secret passageway, they would need his help. Hence, he could cooperate with Tai Chingfeng. Of course, he could also cooperate with Tu Lu. Tai Chingfeng, die for me. Right at this time, Tu Lu's furious roar came from high up in the sky, extremely ruthless. It was only to see the golden runes around Tu Lu become even more berserk. It actually formed a golden giant that was several thousand meters in size outside his body. Kill! Tu Lu roared. The golden giant outside his body slammed a fist down. Berserk and austere golden fist shadows appeared, rumbling over towards Tai Chingfeng. Rumble! But right at this moment, a sword shadow tore through the air, like killing lightning, directly descending on Tu Lu. After a rumble, it actually forced him back several hundred meters. Tai Chingfeng's eyes quivered. His body moved, avoiding Tu Lu's fatal punch. Nie Tian. Tai Chingfeng abruptly lifted his head and saw a silver-haired swordsman standing above the void. It was precisely Nie Tian, and he could not help exclaiming. He had never imagined that Nie Tian would actually save him at this time. What was even more unexpected was that the power of Nie Tian's sword could actually force Tu Lu to retreat. But Nie Tian clearly only had the cultivation of a rank 2 half-sage. In the void far away, more than a dozen martial artists of 8 secret territorial waters were stunned by the scene in front of them. Their mouths were wide open, but they could not make a sound. Mu Tsubing was also stunned, his heart incomparably shocked. At this moment, he only knew how terrifying Nie Tian was. He was very glad that he did not fight with Nie Tian previously. On the other side, Tu Lu steadied his body. His eyes darkened as he stared at Nie Tian with incomparable killing intent. He asked coldly, "Who are you? You've already gone to see Dragon Island?" Nie Tian did not answer Tu Lu. Instead, he asked with a gloomy face, "Did you do anything to the people of Sea Dragon Island?" "I killed them." Tu Lu's mouth twitched as he said coldly. "What did you say?" Nie Tian's eyes widened. The murderous intent in his eyes was on the verge of bursting out. The blood in his body was flowing rapidly, as if it was boiling. He had already sensed a bloody aura from Tu Lu's body. However, he did not expect Tu Lu to kill the people of Sea Dragon Island. "I said, I killed everyone from Sea Dragon Island." Tu Lu's eyes were cold as he uttered each word in a ferocious manner. Nie Tian could hear it clearly. The sword intent in his body rose and burst out like a tsunami in the blink of an eye. His eyes were cold and murderous. The demon eye was as dark as the night, like a bottomless abyss, causing one to feel endless despair. You! Tu Lu suddenly sensed a sharp murderous intent approaching him. His ferocious eyes shuddered slightly, revealing a hint of panic. He was shocked that he could sense a threat from this rank 2 half-sacred. The threat was extremely clear, with a faint aura of death. How is this possible? How could a rank 2 half-sacred pose a threat to him? You deserve to die. At that moment Nye Tian opened his mouth. His pitch-black demon eye unleashed a boundless eye-force, which shrouded Tu Lu like a raging wave. Tu Lu instantly felt his heart tremble, followed by an illusion that he was falling into a trap. His eyes instantly turned dull, without a trace of vigor. Whoosh! At that instant, a sharp sword shadow pierced through the air. As the sword light flickered, a ray of blood appeared and sprinkled in the air. Following that, Tu Lu's dull eyes suddenly moved, but it was too late. He felt a warm liquid spurting out from his neck. He subconsciously covered his neck with his hands, but he could not stop the blood from gushing out. You! He stared at Nye Tian in shock. He wanted to say something, but he no longer had the chance. At the last moment, he regretted it. He lied. He did not kill the people of Sea Dragon Island. Chapter 2889. Took the wrong medicine. The scene in the sky caused the entire place to fall into a deathly silence. Silence, deathly silence. All eyes were focused on Nye Tian. The shock, surprise, fear, and panic in their eyes converged into the most complicated light. Who would have thought that the arrogant and powerful Tulu would be killed by Nye Tian just like that? The method Nye Tian had used to kill Tu Lu was also extremely strange. One look and one sword, and Tu Lu was directly killed by him. If they hadn't seen it with their own eyes, no one would have believed it. Everyone sensed that the moment Nye Tian killed Tu Lu, his entire person seemed to be filled with a terrifying demonic aura. Tai Chingfeng and Mu Tsubing were also completely dumbfounded. They couldn't imagine that a second-stage half-saint could actually burst out with such terrifying power. Nye Tian was too scary. Lord Nye Tian, are you all right? Moments later, Tai Chingfeng finally reacted. Trembling with fear, he came to Nye Tian's side. Even the way he addressed Nye Tian had changed. His eyes revealed great respect. At this moment, Nye Tian had calmed down a little. There was a bloodstain at the corner of his demon eye. Just now, he was infuriated to the extreme. His demonic eye exploded with an extremely powerful ocular power, causing blood to flow out of his eyes. When the demonic eye released its power, he could feel a demonic aura surging within his body, pushing his martial body to its limits in an instant. He was very curious. Where did that momentary devil chi come from? I'm fine. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed and returned to normal. Then, he moved and arrived before the cultivators of the 8 Mystic Sea region. The 10-odd 8 Secret Sea region cultivators looked at Nye Tian with trembling eyes. Clearly, they were extremely afraid. Even their Sea Lord was killed by Nye Tian in a strange way. How could they be a match for Nye Tian? If Nye Tian wanted to kill them, they wouldn't be able to fight back at all and could only obediently accept their death. Nye Tian's eyes were cold and murderous. He stared at the dozen black-clothed martial artists without saying a word. This lord, the people of Sea Dragon Island are not dead. They are still alive. At this moment, a cultivator mustered his courage and said with a trembling voice, "Is what you said true?" Nye Tian's eyes suddenly flickered as he asked. Absolutely. The man's forehead was drenched in cold sweat as he said, "Even if this lowly one had 100 times more courage, I wouldn't have deceived Darren. That idiot Tu Lu lied to Milord. He deserves to die 10,000 times for his crime. His death will not be regretted. Cut the crap. Take me to him," Nye Tian growled in a cold tone. Yes. The man nodded his head repeatedly. Then, he moved and flew towards Sea Dragon Island. All of you, come with me, Nie Tian said coldly, and then followed after them. Seeing this, Tai Ching-fong and Mu Tsubing quickly followed. Their son was still on Sea Dragon Island. After a while, under the lead of that man, Nie Tian and the others came to an empty space on Sea Dragon Island. Under the watch of several 8 secret sea region cultivators, the people of Sea Dragon Island were imprisoned by a barrier. Release them. Nie Tianling growled coldly. One of the 8 secret sea region cultivators immediately closed the barrier. Nie Tian. Hai Dachuan saw Nie Tian and shouted in surprise. Big brother Nie Tian. The Sea Dragon King saw Nie Tian and was also very surprised. The people of Sea Dragon Island looked at the silver-haired youth in front of them and were very happy. Unknowingly, Nie Tian had become a messiah in their hearts. It seemed that as long as Nie Tian was here, everything could be solved. Father! At this moment, a sharp voice was heard. Then, a figure rushed out and came to Mu Tsubing's side. It was Mu Lei. Mu Lei. Mu Tsubing was happy to see that Mu Lei was still alive. However, in the next moment, Mu Lei suddenly turned to Tai Ching-fong, pointed at Nie Tian, and shouted, Teacher, this is the kid who injured me and Senior Marshal Brother Tai Longding. Quickly avenge us and kill him. Shut up. Tai Ching-feng's face darkened. He stared fiercely at Mu Lei and scolded him in a cold tone. Teacher, Mu Lei was stunned like an idiot and did not know what was going on. Father, this kid injured me. Please kill him for me. At this moment, Tai Longdang also walked to Tai Ching-feng's side and stared at Nie Tian viciously. Slap. However, just as he finished speaking, Tai Ching-fong suddenly raised his hand and gave him a solid slap on the face. Father, you! Half of Tai Longding's face was swollen and a few bright red handprints were glaring. He looked at Tai Ching-fong in horror and looked even more idiotic than Mu Lei. He had asked Tai Ching-fong to avenge him, so why did the latter slap him instead? What was going on? Hai Dachuan and the others looked at the scene in front of them and were also stunned. They looked as if they had seen a ghost. Everyone in the 9 Dragon Sea knew that Tai Ching-fong was extremely protective of his son. But today, Tai Ching-fong actually slapped Tai Longdang in front of so many people. What was going on? Slap. Just when everyone was in a daze, another slap sounded. Everyone's eyes turned and saw that it was Mu Tsubing who had slapped Mu Lei. This. Everyone's eyes widened and they all gasped. They did not understand what was going on. Had Tai Ching-fong and Mu Tsubing gone mad? At this moment, Tai Ching-fong and Mu Tsubing's eyes swept across Nie Tian, as if they were observing his reaction. Nie Tian, on the other hand, looked indifferent. A smile hung at the corner of his mouth, but he did not speak. Slap. Then, Tai Ching-feng's face darkened and he slapped Tai Longdang again. Slap. Almost at the same time, Mu Tsubing also slapped Mu Lei. Everyone was stunned to the extreme. What was going on today? Tai Longdang and Mu Lei's faces were red and swollen. They felt as if they were dreaming. Tai Ching-fong and Mu Tsubing saw that Nie Tian was still not speaking and immediately raised their hands, wanting to slap him again. Enough! At this moment Nie Tian suddenly spoke. He smiled faintly and said, 2 slaps are enough. How could he not see that Tai Ching-fong and Mu Tsubing had slapped Tai Longdang and Mu Lei to protect their lives? Tai Ching-fong and Mu Tsubing were worried that Nie Tian would kill Tai Longdang and Mu Lei directly, so they had slapped them ruthlessly. If Nie Tian did not speak, they would definitely continue slapping them. Thank you, Lord Nie Tian. Tai Ching-fong and Mu Tsubing saw that Nie Tian had spoken and quickly took a step forward and bowed deeply. They were extremely respectful. This scene stunned everyone present. Many rubbed their eyes, thinking that they had seen wrongly. The Lord of the 9 Dragon Sea and the Lord of Thunder Island were so respectful in front of Nie Tian. Had they taken the wrong medicine? Father! Father! Mu Lei and Tai Longdang were stunned for a long time, but they still did not understand what was going on. They took a step forward and wanted to say something. Chapter 2890. A careless reminder. Tai Longdeng and Mu Lei stared at Tai Chingfeng and Mu Tsubing in astonishment, unable to react for a long time. Kneel and apologize to Lord Nietian. Tai Chingfeng and Mu Tsubing's expressions darkened again as they growled. It was only then that Tai Longdeng and Mu Lei came to their senses. The two turned at the same time and looked at Nietian in shock, hesitating for a moment before finally kneeling. Get up. Nietian smiled and said lightly. He actually did not intend for Tai Longdeng and Mu Lei to kneel and apologize to him, but since Tai Chingfeng and Mu Tsubing were so insistent, he naturally would not refuse. Tai Longdeng and Mu Lei stood up and retreated behind Tai Chingfeng and Mu Tsubing, not daring to say anything else. My young friend Nietian, what happened? Hai Dachuan could not help but ask as he came to Nietian's side with a look of astonishment. Just now, Region Lord Tai Chingfeng and a fellow called Tulu were fighting. I saw that he was at a disadvantage, so I helped him and killed Tulu. Region Lord Tai Chingfeng was just expressing his gratitude. Nietian smiled faintly and said with a calm expression. That! Hai Dachuan was stunned and speechless for a long time. He naturally knew who Tulu was, and even more so knew the latter's strength. From what Nietian said, it seemed that he had killed Tulu. But was that possible? Tulu was a rank 2 demi-saint martialist. But if Nietian had not killed Tulu, would Tai Chingfeng and Mu Tsubing be so polite to him? Hai Dachuan felt a chill run down his spine at the thought. If Nietian had really killed Tulu, then it would be too much of a freak, so much so that it would make one's hair stand on end. Lord Nietian, what should we do with the 8 secret territories? Tai Chingfeng walked over at that moment and asked cautiously as he looked at Nietian. Why don't we kill them? Mu Tsubing suggested as he stepped forward. Nietian's cold gaze swept over him, scaring Mu Tsubing so much that he shrunk his neck and retreated. Although these people from the 8 secret territorial waters occupied the Ocean Dragon Island, they did not kill the people of the Ocean Dragon Island. Therefore, Nietian could be more merciful towards them. Island Lord, these people are here to invade Sea Dragon Island. You decide how to deal with them, Nietian said to Hai Dachuan after thinking for a while. Lord Nietian, they were just following orders. Moreover, they didn't kill anyone. Why don't we just let them stay on Sea Dragon Island? Hai Dachuan was a smart man. He understood Nietian's intention and said lightly. The reason why Nietian asked for Hai Dachuan's opinion was to let these people stay on the Sea Dragon Island and listen to Hai Dachuan's orders. These people were not weak. Some of them were even stronger than Hai Dachuan. It would be great if they could stay on Sea Dragon Island as guards. All right. Nietian smiled faintly. He then glanced at those people with killing intent in his eyes and said, Remember, you are still alive because of the mercy of Sea Dragon Island Lord. Your lives are given by Sea Dragon Island Lord. Do you understand? Understood. Those people nodded in unison. They then turned to face Hai Dachuan and knelt down. They said in unison, Thank you, Sea Dragon Island Lord, for sparing our lives. Everyone, please rise. From today onwards, you are the people of Sea Dragon Island. Hai Dachuan laughed and gestured for them to stand up. Nietian nodded. He believed that with his deterrence, these martial artists of the 8 secret territorial waters would not betray him in a short period of time. Next, Nietian and the others came to the conference hall of Sea Dragon Island. Because Tulu said that there was more than one compass map, the following things would be very troublesome. If all the Sea Lords saw through the secret of the compass map and knew about the existence of the secret passage, then Sea Dragon Island would become a place where heroes fought for supremacy. It turns out that there is a secret passage to Cloud Buddha Peak hidden in that volcano. Hai Dachuan, who was in the conference hall, was shocked after hearing what Nietian said. he finally knew why Tai Chingfeng and the others were so eager to control Sea Dragon Island. Tai Chingfeng looked at Nie Tian and said with a worried expression, "Lord Nie Tian, there's more than one compass map. I'm guessing that the other lords of the other seas also know about the existence of the secret tunnel. I'm afraid that the Sea Dragon Island won't be peaceful anymore." At this moment, he already knew that he could not protect Sea Dragon Island with his strength, and Nie Tian had unknowingly become the real controller of Sea Dragon Island. "Territory Lord Tai, how is the strength of the other Sea Lords compared to yours?" Nie Tian frowned and asked with a gloomy face. He was also worried about the same thing. If there were many Sea Lords coming at the same time, he would not be able to stop them with his strength. This time, he could easily kill Tu Lu mainly because of the power of the demon eye. Furthermore, the power of the demonic eye needed to be accumulated slowly. It could not be used continuously. In terms of real combat strength, Nie Tian was about the same as a first-level demi-saint. Of course, this was under the condition that he did not activate the Holy Soul Curse in his body. Although the Holy Soul Curse could be activated and allow Nie Tian to obtain stronger combat strength, it would damage his martial physique. If he kept using the Holy Soul Curse, it would be a huge hindrance to the improvement of his cultivation speed. Therefore, Nie Tian would not let Lulu help him activate the Holy Soul Curse unless it was absolutely necessary. "Lord Nie Tian, to tell you the truth, my strength is only inferior among the 108 Sea Lords of the Bitter Sea Horizon. Many of the other Sea Lords are stronger than me, and some of them are even 4th-level demi-saints." Tai Chingfeng's eyes darkened as he nodded. 4th-level demi-saint. After a moment of pondering, Nie Tian asked, "I'm curious. Why are the cultivators from the edge of the Bitter Sea so weak?" "Because of the Bitter Sea restriction." Tai Chingfeng was stunned for a moment, thinking that Nie Tian already knew the reason. Then, he explained how the Bitter Sea restriction suppressed the martial artists of the Bitter Sea Horizon and finally said, "Because of the existence of the Bitter Sea restriction, the martial artists of the Eye of the Bitter Sea have a much shorter lifespan than other martial artists of the same level. Martial artists who can live for more than 100,000 years are very rare even in the Bitter Sea Horizon." "So that's how it is." Nie Tian frowned and shook his head. He did not expect the Bitter Sea restriction to be so powerful. He was very curious about the origin of the Sea of Suffering's restriction. "Lord Nie Tian, what should we do next?" Tai Chingfeng continued to ask. Nie Tian's face darkened, and he was silent for a moment. How was he going to face the challenges from the other Sea Lords? At this moment, the Sea Dragon King suddenly opened his mouth and said, "The Cloud Buddhashire family is really too much. They got so many compass maps but only have a single secret passage. Aren't they too stingy?" Nie Tian's eyes trembled and his face stiffened when he heard the Sea Dragon King's words. The others were stunned at first, and then their expressions changed. The Sea Dragon King's unintentional words reminded everyone. Chapter 2891. The Sea Dragon King's words reminded everyone. "Yeah, why didn't I think of that?" After a while, Nie Tian reacted and couldn't help but smile. He then stood up and asked Tai Chingfeng to take out the compass map. At the same time, he also took out the compass map he got from Tu Lu. He carefully compared them and found that there seemed to be a slight difference between the two compass maps. "Fat, take a look at these two compass maps." Nie Tian couldn't understand the compass maps and could only ask Fat Cat for guidance. A ball of glaze energy appeared in the air and shrouded the two compass maps before disappearing. Fat Cat had already become the spirit of the Glaze Demon Pagoda. Now, she spent half of her time in the Origin Fetus space, and the other half in the Glaze Demon Pagoda. Everyone in the hall was dumbfounded when they saw the two compass maps disappear. They didn't know what was going on. Nie Tian, that Dragon King kid is right. According to the compass map, there is more than one secret passage to the Cloud Buddha Peak. There are many of them. Not long after, Fat Cat's voice was heard with a proud smile. A lot. Nye Tian went blank for a moment, then asked in astonishment, How many? At least a few dozen. Little Fat Cat chuckled and said, This compass map is very strange. It must have been sealed before, but it should have only been opened recently. Ask that guy surnamed Tai when the compass map was opened. After that, a ball of glaze energy appeared and a compass map appeared. It was Tai Chingfeng's compass map, while Tu Lu's compass map was kept by Fat Cat. Region Lord Tai, this compass map has always been sealed, right? When was it opened? Nye Tian passed the compass map to Tai Chingfeng and asked in a deep voice. Tai Chingfeng's eyes trembled as he didn't expect Nye Tian to ask this question. Fat Cat was right. The compass map had always been closed. It was only recently that it was opened. After it was opened, the secret passage was revealed. Tai Chingfeng didn't hide anything and told him everything. Then, he opened the compass map. Countless light spots appeared and condensed into the full picture of the Bitter Sea horizon. The secret passage hidden in the sea was very conspicuous. It was at the core of the Sea Dragon Island, under that volcano. Lord Island Lord, when did that volcano erupt? Nye Tian's eyes narrowed as he pondered. Suddenly, he looked at Hai Dachuan and asked. Half a month ago. Without waiting for Hai Dachuan to speak, the Sea Dragon King said directly. Nye Tian's eyes darkened, and his expression changed. Just now, Tai Chingfeng said that the compass map would also open in half a month. In that case, it was highly likely that the opening of the compass map and the volcanic eruption occurred at the same time. Could it be a coincidence that these two things happened at the same time? What was even more strange was that although Fat Cat said there were dozens of secret passages, Nye Tian only saw one secret passage on the map in front of him. I understand. In the next moment, his eyes trembled as he finally understood. Lord Nye Tian, what do you understand? Tai Chingfeng was stunned as he didn't know what Nye Tian was talking about. Nye Tian, however, smiled faintly and waved his hand, not saying a word. He guessed that every compass map was different. After the compass map was opened, it would only show one secret passage that led to the Cloud Buddha Peak. Therefore, if the other Sea Lords opened their compass map, they wouldn't see the secret passage on the Sea Dragon Island. There were dozens of secret passages. On average, there should be 2 Sea Lords seeing the same secret passage. Therefore, the Sea Lords who knew about the secret passage on the Sea Dragon Island were only Tai Chingfeng and Tu Lu. After understanding this, Nye Tian couldn't help but laugh. But in the next moment, his face suddenly froze. He was puzzled. The Cloud Buddha clan clearly controlled the shore of the Bitter Sea, so why did they give each of the 108 Sea Lords a compass map? Moreover, this compass map was still sealed and had only been opened recently. Could it be that something happened to the Cloud Buddha clan? Did they need these Sea Lords to enter the Cloud Buddha Peak? The more Nye Tian thought about it, the more he felt that it was possible. Territory Lord Tai, we will enter the secret passage immediately. Nye Tian stood up and said in a deep voice. Lord Nye Tian, are we going now? Tai Chingfeng was stunned. He looked at Nye Tian and said, What if the other Sea Lords come to the Sea Dragon Island after we leave? Don't worry, they won't come. Nye Tian smiled faintly and said very confidently. Tai Chingfeng, Hai Dachuan, and the others were stunned and confused. They saw that Nye Tian didn't want to say more, so they didn't ask. But they instinctively believed in Nye Tian. Then, the group discussed and decided to go to the Cloud Buddha Peak. Other than Nye Tian, Tai Chingfeng, and Mu Tsubing, Tai Longdeng and the Sea Dragon King would also go. Originally, Nye Tian wanted Hai Dachuan to go too, but the latter was injured, so he let the Sea Dragon King go in his place. Nye Tian had the 9 extremities with him, so he could guarantee the Sea Dragon King's safety. Then, the group didn't stay any longer and immediately headed for the crater. After a while, Nye Tian and the others appeared on the crater. Because the volcano had just erupted, the surrounding space was as hot as fire. The volcano spewed magma, and around the crater, lava was like a waterfall. Nietian was worried that the Sea Dragon King wouldn't be able to withstand the lava and let him enter the 9 extremities. As for Tai Chingfeng, Tai Longdeng, and Mu Tsubing, unless it was a life-and-death situation, Nietian wouldn't let them enter the 9 extremities. Currently, the 9 extremities was still his secret, and it wasn't good to let too many people know about it. Then, Nietian's figure moved, and he was the first to jump into the crater. The others immediately followed. After entering the volcano, Nietian felt that the flames in the space were even more violent. However, this kind of flame didn't pose any threat to him. Tai Chingfeng and the other 2 were not weak, so of course they could withstand the lava. Soon, Nietian and the others landed at the bottom of the volcano. What appeared in front of them was an endless passage at the bottom of the mountain. It really is a secret passage. Tai Chingfeng was very excited and shouted loudly. Follow me closely. Nietian didn't say anything else. His figure immediately moved, and he madly ran forward. He guessed that the other Sea Lords must have set off as well. He didn't want others to be ahead of him. Nietian originally thought that there would be many killing traps in the secret passage, but along the way there wasn't any danger at all. Even Tai Chingfeng and the other 2 did not feel anything strange. It was as if the sea of bitterness in their bodies disappeared in this passage. Tai Chingfeng's previous worries were unnecessary. Nietian felt that the people from the Cloudy Buddha clan had intentionally allowed the Sea Lords to approach the Cloudy Buddha Peak. The secret passage was very long. Nietian and the others walked for a full 3 days. 3 days later, they arrived at the end of the passage. It was a spacious area that connected to the outside world. Without the slightest hesitation, Nietian rose into the air. A moment later, he finally came out. He took a step forward and his figure landed in a valley. After he landed on the ground, he looked around and was stunned. The entire valley was covered in scarlet flowers. The ground was filled with brilliant red flowers. At a glance, it looked like a red carpet dyed with blood. This is... Nietian was stunned for more than 10 seconds. He finally opened his mouth, but he couldn't say anything. Chapter 2892. The Path of Scarlet Blood, Manjusaka. Nietian's eyes trembled and his face froze when he heard the fat cat and the ghost emperor's cries. Could it be that the crimson flowers blooming all over the valley were the legendary Manjusaka? This is... At this moment, Tai Chingfeng and the others also appeared. They were stunned when they saw the valley that was as red as fresh blood. Such a scene was simply too shocking to behold. The dazzling blood-like flowers covered the entire valley like fresh blood. This kind of visual shock made one's heart tremble. Nietian and the others were stunned when they saw the scarlet flowers, unable to react for a long time. After a while, Tai Chingfeng finally reacted and looked at Nietian in shock as he asked in a trembling voice, "Lord Nietian, is this the legendary primordial sacred flower Manjusaka?" Nietian's eyes trembled slightly as he nodded almost instinctively. The shock in his heart was no less than Tai Chingfeng and the others. He didn't know if the crimson flowers that covered the entire valley were Manjusaka or not. That's right, this is the legendary Manjusaka. At this moment, the fat cat's voice sounded again with unconcealable shock. This is really Manjusaka? Nietian's eyes narrowed when he heard the fat cat's words, and his expression became even more shocked. Although the scarlet flowers that filled the valley were extremely eye-catching and shocking, the strange thing was that these scarlet flowers did not have any aura, as if they were not real. As long as there was a bit of spirituality in the world, the aura of the exotic flowers would be very strong. One could even sense an extremely strong energy aura from them. However, Nietian did not sense anything from these scarlet flowers. They did not have any aura, which was very strange. According to the legends, Manjusaka was a primordial sacred flower. It was very special, and after a martial artist consumed it, it would greatly enhance their martial body. Otherwise, Manjusaka wouldn't have been able to heal a martial artist's yuan meridians and restore their weakened strength. But now, Nye Tian didn't sense any power aura from the scarlet flower. Was this crimson flower really the legendary Manjusaka? Nye Tian, I know the doubts in your heart. Fat Cat guessed what Nye Tian was thinking. She laughed and said, but this is indeed Manjusaka. Manjusaka, the legendary sacred flower of the reincarnation sacred world. It blooms at the entrance of the reincarnation sacred world. At that moment, the Ghost Emperor's voice rang out, back then, I was fortunate enough to enter the sacred world of samsara. Even now, I can't forget the scene of Manjusaka blooming on both sides of the Yunchuan River and spreading into the sky. That sky is filled with a brilliant red color. It's like fresh blood spreading out in the sky. It's known as the Scarlet Blood Path. The Scarlet Blood Path. Nye Tian's eyes couldn't help but tremble when he heard these words. The valley in front of him was covered with Manjusaka. It was as red as blood. It really was the Scarlet Blood Path. At that moment, the Ghost Emperor said, Nye Tian, look up. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed. He looked up into the sky and was stunned once again by what he saw. He didn't realize that the Manjusaka had spread into the sky. Countless Manjusaka were connected together, forming a stairway to the sky. The scene was too shocking. It was as if a red ribbon was extending from the sky. Nye Tian was completely shocked by the scene in front of him. His face stiffened and he couldn't speak for a long time. Lord Nye Tian, look over there. At this moment, Tai Chingfeng seemed to have discovered something and cried out in horror. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. His expression changed as he looked up into the sky. In the distance, there were also red ribbons made of Manjusaka. They looked like the sunset, descending from the sky. Nye Tian was stunned once again. The shock in his heart couldn't be any greater. He didn't know what was going on. The Manjusaka had spread into the sky. It was too strange. Could it be? The Ghost Emperor's voice was heard again. He was extremely shocked and trembling. He couldn't finish his sentence. Ghost Emperor, what did you discover? Nye Tian was startled and asked anxiously. Could it be that someone is opening the Scarlet Blood Path? The Ghost Emperor said in a deep voice as if he didn't hear Nye Tian's words. Opening the Scarlet Blood Path? What does that mean? Nye Tian's eyes trembled violently. He didn't know what the Ghost Emperor was talking about, so he could only worry. It looks like a huge formation. At this time, the Ghost Emperor did not say anything, but Little Fat Cat's voice rang out. He realized that the red damask formed by the red spider lilies seemed to form a huge sacred formation when combined together. Using so many red spider lilies to construct such a massive formation, just what was the person who had set up the formation trying to do? Fat Cat had seen countless formations, but apart from the Ghost Emperor's tomb that was constructed by the Ghost Emperor himself, none of the other formations were comparable to the one in front of him. This is indeed a huge formation. Someone is trying to use this formation to open the Scarlet Blood Path. The Ghost Emperor said in a deep voice while Fat Cat was still in a state of shock. Nye Tian's pupils shrank slightly, his eyes filled with astonishment. Even now, he still did not understand what the Ghost Emperor meant by opening the Scarlet Blood Path. The Scarlet Blood Path is the entrance to the reincarnation sacred world. This formation should be the Scarlet Blood Sacrificial Formation, which is used to open the Scarlet Blood Path and connect this world to the reincarnation sacred world. The Ghost Emperor said in a deep voice. Perhaps it was because he was too nervous, but his voice was trembling slightly. Nye Tian's face stiffened as he finally understood what the Ghost Emperor meant. Opening the Scarlet Blood Path was actually opening the entrance to the reincarnation sacred world. So far, Nye Tian already knew about the real sacred world, and now he knew about the reincarnation sacred world. However, he didn't understand why the Ghost Emperor was so nervous about opening the Scarlet Blood Path. Wasn't it a good thing to open the entrance to a sacred world? The Scarlet Blood Path requires fresh blood as a sacrifice to unleash the power of Manjasaka, the Ghost Emperor said in a deep voice. What do you mean? Nye Tion's expression changed as he was puzzled. Nye Tion, I'm afraid you've entered a trap by coming here. You're going to be used as sacrifices for the Scarlet Blood sacrificial formation, the Ghost Emperor said in a deep voice. Nye Tion's expression flickered with astonishment. Sacrificial offerings. They're here. At that moment, a violent voice rang out in the sky. Then, more than 10 black-clothed cultivators appeared above the valley. They all had a murderous aura as they stared coldly at Nye Tion and the others. Chapter 2893. Martial artists from the Shi family. The sudden appearance of a dozen martial artists up in the skies caused Tai Chingfeng's eyes to quiver, and he could not help showing a look of fear. It's actually the Shi family. Meanwhile, beside Tai Chingfeng, Mu Tsubing's face had turned pale with fright, and he was even trembling as he spoke. Never in his wildest dreams would he have imagined that they would run into the Shi family of the Cloud Buddha here. The Shi family of the Cloud Buddha represented absolute authority at the Sea of Misery horizon, and they were supreme existences. The martial artists of the Sea of Clouds horizon were usually weak due to the pressure of the Sea of Misery. However, it was different for the Shi family of the Cloud Buddha. It was rumored that by relying on the Manjasaka, even the most talented martial artists could easily reach the level of demi-saint. And now, the dozen or so martial artists who appeared before Nye Tion's group were all very powerful, with the weakest being a half-saint. There were also several demi-saints amongst them, with even one being a 3-stage demi-saint. While such power was not that great, they would definitely be considered as super champions at the Sea of Misery horizon. It should be noted that even Tai Chingfeng and Tulu, Lords of Seas, had only just stepped into the threshold of demi-saint. The patriarch was right. Those idiots really did come. That was when a martial artist of the Shi family laughed, and said with a cold look. He was looking at Nye Tion's group as if he was looking at a bunch of idiots. In his eyes, Nye Tion and the others were certainly no different from idiots. They had gone through so much trouble to find the secret passageway and risked their lives to enter the Cloud Buddha Peak, only to become sacrifices for the Scarlet Blood sacrificial array once they arrived. What else could they be but idiots? Ha ha! Our ancestor had handed those 108 compasses to the Lords of the Seas, and these fools would never have dreamed that it was actually a trap. Ha! Another martial artist of the Shi family laughed loudly and very insolently. Tai Chingfeng and the others looked at each other in bewilderment. They simply had no idea what the martial artist of the Shi family was talking about, and their expressions were really no different from idiots. On the other hand, Nye Tion had a solemn look on his face. He understood what the martial artist of the Shi family was talking about. When the ancestors of the Shi family had given the compasses to the Lords of the Seas, they had deliberately left behind a secret passageway into the Cloud Buddha Peak, all in order to lure the Lords of the Seas into the Cloud Buddha Peak one day. Furthermore, not only would they not obtain the Manjasaka after entering the Cloud Buddha Peak, but they would also become sacrifices for the sacrificial blood sacrificial ritual. Nye Tion was now convinced that the Scarlet Blood sacrificial grand spell formation had been set up by people from the Shi clan. The ritual was so massive that it must have taken a long time to set it. As for the Cloud Buddha Shi family, after setting up the sacrificial array, they activated the compass map. This was equivalent to opening a trap that had been set up in advance, causing the Sea Lord to jump into the pit. There was more than one secret passageway, which meant that all the Sea Lords had been split up. This way, killing these people would be very easy. Father, what are these people saying? How come I don't understand? Tai Longdeng was scared out of his wits. He looked at Tai Chingfeng with a sluggish expression. Still, Tai Chingfeng's expression was not much better than his. He was also at a loss. My lords, we have trespassed on the Cloud Buddha Peak by mistake. Please be magnanimous and spare us. Mu Tsubing, on the other hand, had calmed down and looked up at the martial artist of the Sure family up in the sky. Spare you? Sure. One of the Sure clan's experts sneered. Then, his silhouette moved and he ruthlessly slammed his palm downwards. Suddenly, a violent thunderous palm energy fell down, causing the void to tremble. The surrounding space suddenly tightened, as if it was about to be torn apart by a tremendous force. The martial artist was not weak. He was a first-tier demi-saint, and the power behind his palm was enough to directly kill Mu Tsubing. Brother Tai, save me! Mu Tsubing's eyes trembled as he cried out in horror, hoping that Tai Chingfeng would save him. However, Tai Chingfeng simply stood where he was like a puppet, not moving at all. Die! The martial artist of the Sure family bellowed like thunder, his aura frighteningly violent. It was clear that he intended to kill Mu Tsubing right there and then. Mu Tsubing was too weak. His blood was not enough to activate Manjusaka's power, which was why there was no need for such a person to live. Boom! But that was when Mu Tsubing had already lost all hope. A sword shadow whizzed out and directly blocked the fatal palm strike in the air. Boom! The air rumbled and the void trembled. In the instant that the sword will surged, the figure of the martial artist of the Sure family was actually forced back by hundreds of meters. Huh! The martial artist steadied himself and exclaimed in surprise. Then, his cold and somber gaze locked onto Nie Tian. When he sensed Nie Tian's power, his eyes could not help but narrow, and the shock and astonishment in his heart were written all over his face. He hadn't expected that the cultivator who'd broken his palm strike and forced him to retreat was only a second-stage half-saint. He was a martial artist of the Sure family and a first-tier demi-saint. How could it be possible that he was forced back by a second-tier demi-saint? Brat, you're courting death. But in the next moment, the martial artist's eyes turned cold and murderous intent surged out. After a fierce roar, his entire body was like a berserk beast, and he struck out with both palms at Nie Tian. Humph! Nie Tian felt the violent power coming at him, but he was not afraid at all. Instead, he sneered and blasted out with the starry heavenly slash in his hand. The sword's shadow was like a raging dragon breaking out of the abyss as it shot up into the sky. Boom! Boom! The sword's shadow roared and the sword will burst forth with terrifying power in the air. The two fist shadows in the air were directly bombarded and shattered. In the next moment, the martial artist suddenly sensed that something was amiss. His eyes trembled and he screamed, "Oh no!" But unfortunately, it was too late. Bang! In the void, a dull thud was heard. The martial artist's figure was sent flying into the sky, leaving a trail of blood in the air before exploding into a bloody light and vanishing. The ghastly scene made everyone's eyes tremble, and the scene fell into a dead silence for several seconds. How dare you? How dare you kill a martial artist of the Sure family? After the dead silence came an explosion of rage. One of the martial artists of the Sure family roared thunderously as he unleashed his aura, which surged violently in the air. That martial artist turned out to be a second-tier demi-saint. Go to hell! In the next moment, he bellowed as a black spear appeared in his hand. The spear swept out like a dragon, and 8 spear shadows appeared in the air, each more violent than the last, and all of them pressed down on Nie Tian. Your Sure family dares to kill us, so why wouldn't I dare to kill him? Nie Tianling laughed and moved. The sword light on the starry heavenly slash shone brightly, and a violent sword will whistled in the air like a storm of sharp blades. It was so sharp that it seemed like it could tear everything in its path apart. The other martial artists of the Sure family in the sky could not help but tremble when they saw the scene. They clearly did not expect that a second-tier demi-saint martial artist would have such terrifying power in his body. Chapter 2894. A bizarre sword will boom. Boom. Up in the sky, a series of spear shadows whizzed down like raging thunder, pressing down on Nie Tian. The surrounding space suddenly sank, as if it was about to be crushed. Tai Ching-fong and the others' expressions changed as they instinctively retreated. Boom! However, Nie Tian was fearless. The sword shadows around his body raged like the sea as he activated the astral soul shield. Then, the divine demon energy within his body suddenly became violent, fusing with the sword will around him to form the divine demon sword will. A sharp aura suddenly filled the space between heaven and earth. At this time, Nie Tian's eyes were cold, and the aura around him was sharp. His entire body was like a giant sword that could cut through everything. Boom! In the next instant, the starry heaven slash in Nie Tian's hand moved. The sword slashed through the heavens, and the violent power of the divine demon sword will was instantly unleashed. Boom! 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 In the void, the spear shadows were shattered under the impact of the sword shadows, turning into a violent force that wreaked havoc in the space. Huh! At this moment, the martial artist from the Shi family sensed danger. His eyes narrowed, and he was extremely shocked. He clearly did not expect Nie Tian's strength to be so terrifying. At this time, if the soaring sword shadow were to slash through the heavens, the martial artist from the Shi family would die without a doubt. Boom! At the moment of life and death, a majestic force came down from the sky and landed heavily on the giant sword shadow, forcefully shattering the sword shadow. Nie Tian, who was standing below, suddenly felt the violent pressure coming at him, and his expression could not help but change. Bang! Then, the violent force came down and bombarded on his astral soul shield, bursting out a dull sound like thunder. Nie Tian's figure abruptly retreated, and after he stabilized himself, there was a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth, and his face was slightly pale. He suddenly looked up and saw a martial artist from the Shi family. It was the third-order demi-saint martial artist who had made his move. "Thank you, Brother Tiger." As for the cultivator who had been saved, he was still in a state of shock. He retreated to the side of the person who had saved him and bowed to thank him. This martial artist who was addressed as brother who was the captain of this group of Shi family's martial artists. His name was Shi Tonghu, and he was the strongest among this group of Shi family's martial artists. "Back off!" Shi Tonghu waved his hand to dismiss the cultivator. His eyes were filled with an incomparably chilling, killing intent as he stared fixedly at Nie Tian. His hatred was so intense that it seemed like he wanted to skin the latter alive. Nie Tian smiled faintly. There was not much fluctuation in his eyes, and his expression was very calm. However, the faces of the people beside him were deathly pale, as if they were scared out of their wits. Especially Tai Longdeng. His eyes were trembling violently, looking at Nie Tian as if he was looking at a mountain. Not long ago, Nie Tian had defeated him. However, he felt that his defeat was unjust. If he was given another chance, he believed that even if he could not defeat Nie Tian, he would not have lost so quickly. But now, after witnessing Nie Tian's true strength, he finally realized how wide the gap between him and Nie Tian was. Nie Tian was simply too terrifying. He had killed a first-order demi-saint so effortlessly, and even the second-order demi-saint had almost died at Nie Tian's hands. It was only then that he understood why Tai Ching-fong and Mu Tsubing were so respectful towards Nie Tian. Of course, they did not want to be respectful, but they had to be. "Kid, you're amazing. With the cultivation of a second-order demi-saint, you killed a first-order demi-saint like slaughtering a chicken or a dog. I've never seen a talent like yours in my life." Shi Tonghu looked at Nie Tian and spoke eerily. His eyes were surging with a cold glint like a sharp blade, as if he wanted to tear Nie Tian apart. The Cloud Buddha Shi family had come to the Sea of Suffering Horizon for so many years, but this was the first time someone had killed a member of the Cloud Buddha Shi family. Killing a martial artist of the Cloud Buddha Shi family was tantamount to challenging the authority of the Cloud Buddha Shi family, and it was absolutely unforgivable. "Are you complimenting me?" Nie Tian looked at Shi Tonghu and smiled faintly. His expression was so calm that others would think that he was deliberately provoking the other. However, Nie Tian was feeling very strange at this moment. He had sensed an unusual aura when he used the sword will of the demon gods and demons just now. It was as if his sword will of the demon gods and demons had absorbed a very mysterious power in the air. However, he did not know what that power was and where it came from. "Do you think you deserve my compliment?" Shi Tonghu said coldly as he took a step forward. The coldness in his eyes had reached its limit. It was obvious that he was going to personally fight Nie Tian. "Bring it on." Nie Tian was not afraid at all. With a shake of his body, the sword will of the demon gods and demons became even more violent. At this moment, he once again sensed the sword will of the demon gods and demons absorbing the power in the air. The sword aura around him was also becoming more and more violent. It was extremely terrifying. Shi Tonghu originally wanted to attack directly, but at this moment, he suddenly noticed something, and his expression couldn't help but change. He was extremely shocked in his heart, and he cried out in alarm, "How can this kid absorb the power of Red Spider Lily? Manjasaka!" Nie Tian's sword will of the demon gods and demons was absorbing the power of Manjasaka. What made Shi Tonghu even more confused was that the power of Manjasaka that Nie Tian had absorbed was in a dormant state. Manjasaka did contain a terrifying power. The people of the Shi clan had relied on Manjasaka's power to start the path of scarlet blood. However, Manjasaka was extremely strange. Under normal circumstances, it would always be in a dormant state. According to the rumors, Manjasaka was bloodthirsty. Only the pure blood of a cultivator could awaken Manjasaka from its dormant state to its active state. Only when Manjasaka was in an active state could it release its power. However, when Nie Tian released the sword will of the demon gods and demons, it was obvious that he was absorbing the power of Manjasaka. How was this possible? What kind of power did Nie Tian's sword will of the demon gods and demons contain? Shi Tonghu was stunned by the scene in front of him. He could not understand what was going on. "Brother Hu? Are you all right?" The person beside Shi Tonghu saw the dazed look on Shi Tonghu's face and could not help calling out, "I'm fine." Shi Tonghu reacted at this time. His eyes flashed with a cold, killing intent. He did not care how strange Nie Tian's sword will of the demon gods and demons was. He wanted to capture Nie Tian first. As long as he captured Nie Tian, he could find a sword path grandmaster in the clan to take a look. He would naturally be able to understand the secret of his sword will. "Kid, I can see that you're a rare genius. I can give you a chance. As long as you lower your head to me, not only can I spare your life, I can even let you join the Shi clan. How about it?" Shi Tonghu thought for a moment and said solemnly. He did not want to kill Nie Tian. He wanted to capture Nie Tian alive. Nie Tian's sword will was too strange. It could actually absorb power from the dormant Manjasaka. This secret, he must get to the bottom of it. "Spare my life." Nie Tian looked at Shi Tonghu with a cold smile. "Just you, are you worthy?" Chapter 2895. A fierce battle. Nie Tian sensed the violence in Shi Tonghu's aura, but he was not afraid at all. Instead, he smiled coldly and said, "Your Shi clan is really despicable. Using a few broken compasses, you tricked all the Sea Lords into coming to the Cloudy Buddha Peak to be sacrificial offerings for your great formation." How did you know?" Shi Tonghu's eyes couldn't help but tremble upon hearing Nie Tian's words. His expression was one of extreme horror, and he subconsciously cried out in alarm, but his words came to an abrupt stop halfway. His current expression proved that Nie Tian's guess was correct. These Sea Lords were lured to the Cloudy Buddha Peak to be sacrificial offerings for the Scarlet Blood sacrificial array. Shi Tonghu's expression was ugly and shocked, as if he had just eaten **tea. Not even in his dreams did he expect that Nie Tian would know about the Scarlet Blood sacrificial array. This was a secret of the Cloudy Buddha Sher clan. Not to mention outsiders, even within the Sher clan, only a small number of people knew about it. Nie Tian had just arrived at the Cloudy Buddha Peak. How did he know about the sacrificial array? Who was Nie Tian? Little brat, I wanted to spare your life. Unfortunately, you know too much. In the next moment, Shi Tonghu smiled coldly. He could no longer control his murderous intent. With a low growl, his figure moved. His arm suddenly reached out and formed a claw. Then, he slammed down violently. Roar. Suddenly, an earth-shattering tiger roar resounded in the sky. Following that, a violent aura spread out. The shadow of a black tiger that was thousands of meters long appeared. Like a giant black mountain, it pressed down on Nie Tian. Boom! An incomparably violent force exploded in an instant. The sky shook violently as if it was about to be torn apart at any time. Shi Tonghu's strength was so great that it could be described as shocking. The force that erupted from his palm was enough to instantly kill a cultivator of the same level. To be able to erupt with such terrifying power, this meant that Shi Tonghu's physical body, martial body, was extremely powerful. Lord Nie Tian, be careful! Tai Chingfeng's pupils abruptly shrank as he cried out in alarm when he sensed the wild energy that covered the sky and covered the earth. Of course, he knew that Nie Tian was his last hope. If Nie Tian lost, then all of them would die. All right, let me see just how strong you are. Nie Tian smiled faintly, and the astral heaven slash in his hand disappeared. His body shook, and immediately, divine and demonic energy surged out. Boom! Along with the power of the gods and demons, a terrifying sea of dragon energy surged out. In the next instant, a strange scene occurred. Streams of fiend god power that were as violent as dragons merged with the dragon chi ocean. Boom! Immediately after, the dragon energy ocean became unusually violent. Streams of dragon energy formed roaring vortexes in the air. Let me see if your black tiger is stronger, or my divine dragon is stronger. Nie Tian let out a low roar and then struck out with his palm. Suddenly, the dragon energy ocean around him rumbled, and a terrifying divine dragon rushed out from the dragon energy ocean. The divine dragon's body was 4,000 to 5,000 meters long, and its entire body was surging with the terrifying power of scarlet lightning. The entire body of the dragon was very realistic, as if it was made of flesh and blood. The strangest thing was that the body of the divine dragon was actually surrounded by streams of black power that looked like dragon patterns. This was the power of the gods and demons. Nie Tian could create the gods and demons' sword intent by fusing the power of the gods and demons with his sword intent. However, this was the first time that he had fused the power of the gods and demons with the dragon energy. He also did not know what kind of power the 9 dragon veins that had fused with the power of the gods and demons would be able to produce. Roar! In the next instant, the gods and demons roared angrily, and the dragon's roar shook the sky. A huge body rolled out, and the space around it emitted a deep groan. It seemed that at this moment, even the heavens and earth had become small. Boom! Boom! High up in the sky, a dragon and a tiger charged at each other, and a terrifying aura spread out in the space. It was a real battle between a dragon and a tiger. At this instant, everyone's expression became completely blank. It was within everyone's expectations that Shi Tonghu could produce such power. However, Nie Tian was just a second-order half-martial sage. How could he produce such a terrifying power? At this moment, the ones who were the most shocked were none other than Tai Chingfeng and the others. They had been shocked by Nie Tian's strength more than once, but this time, they still found it hard to believe. Currently, Tai Chingfeng even felt that Nie Tian was an undefeatable martial cultivator. Nie Tian was currently only a second-order half-martial sage. Once he grew into a ninth-order pseudo-martial sage, who knew how terrifying he would be. At that time, even a real sage might not be a match for Nietian. Tai Chingfeng was glad that he was on the side of Nietian. Bang! Right at this moment, high up in the sky, the black tiger and the divine dragon collided head-on. The space suddenly shook, and a muffled sound that sounded like a clap of thunder rang out. Immediately, boundless waves spread out from the center of the collision. Crack, crack, crack. At the most intense collision area, the void finally could not withstand it and was directly torn apart. Logically speaking, Nietian and Shi Tonghu's strength was far from being able to tear apart space. However, Nietian used dragon energy. Moreover, it was dragon energy that was fused with the power of the fiend god. Dragon energy originally had a weakening effect on time and space. Dragon energy that was fused with the power of the fiend god had an even more obvious weakening effect on space. Therefore, at this moment time and space were forcibly torn apart. Boom, 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 chi, 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 loud explosions rang out continuously in the sky. Endless power wreaked havoc in the space, as if it wanted to devour the heaven and earth. It was Nietian's first time fusing the dragon energy and the power of the fiend god. In a head-on collision, he was actually on par with Shi Tonghu. However, he knew that there was another important reason why his 9 dragon veins could erupt with such terrifying power. That was the mysterious power in the void. The mysterious power's aura was very obscure. Only when it was being absorbed by the power of the fiend god could Nietian vaguely feel it. He still did not know where this power came from. At this moment, the crowd looked at the shocking scene in the sky and could not help but gasp. No one expected this battle to turn out like this. The dragon and the tiger wrestled with each other. Both sides did not give an inch and were actually evenly matched. However, some of the stronger martial artists realized that the black tiger's power was slowly weakening while the divine dragon's power was constantly increasing. The divine dragon seemed to be absorbing power from the space. To put it more accurately, it was the black power circulating around the divine dragon's body that was constantly absorbing power. Manjasaka. Some of the Shi family martial artists finally realized that something was wrong. Their eyes trembled and they exclaimed. They realized that the divine dragon formed by Nietian was actually absorbing Manjasaka's power. Roar. At this moment, the divine dragon in the sky suddenly roared. Suddenly, its aura skyrocketed, and a violent dragon's might surged in the void. Chapter 2896. Divine Demon Plunder. Boom, boom, boom. Just as the black tiger's illusory figure collapsed, an endless wild force surged in the void. It was extremely terrifying as it wreaked havoc. Ah! Shi Tonghu let out a blood-curdling scream. Before he could react, his figure was submerged in the wild wave. Leader! The Shi family's cultivators cried out in shock. Their eyes were trembling as they could not believe the scene before them. Shi Tonghu had actually lost to Nietian. Tai Chingfeng and the others were also dumbfounded. The shock on their faces could not be any greater. Of course, they had hoped that Nietian would win, but when it really happened, it seemed so unreal. After a long time, the wild waves in the void gradually dissipated. A bloodied figure appeared in front of everyone. It was Shi Tonghu. At this time, Shi Tonghu's body was swaying and trembling as if he would fall at any time. His breathing was weak and his eyes were filled with horror. He looked at Nietian as if he had seen a ghost. The outcome of this battle was completely out of his expectations. Opposite him, Nietian's figure stood still. His face was calm, but his eyes were as sharp as a sword. How can you absorb Manjasaka's power? Shi Tonghu's eyes were trembling as he spoke with difficulty. He really could not understand how Nietian could absorb Manjasaka's power. If it was not for the divine dragon continuously absorbing Manjasaka's power, Shi Tonghu would not have lost at all. Manjasaka? Nietian's eyes narrowed when he heard Shi Tonghu's words. Only now did he realize that the power that the divine demon force absorbed from the void came from Manjusaka. But how was this possible? Nyetian could not sense Manjusaka's aura at all. He even suspected that Manjusaka really contained a powerful force. Manjusaka. It's Manjusaka. At this moment, the fat cat's voice suddenly rang out. It was extremely excited as it said, "I didn't realize that the power of the gods and demons was absorbing Manjusaka's power." Fat cat, that's impossible, right? As soon as the fat cat's voice fell, the ghost emperor's voice rang out, "These Manjusaka are in a dormant state. The power of the gods and demons isn't absorbing the power of the Manjusaka, it's simply plundering the power of the Manjusaka." Absorbing and plundering, isn't it the same? The fat cat chuckled and said proudly, "The power of gods and demons is an ancient taboo power. It's not strange that it can forcefully absorb power from Manjusaka." The ghost emperor was stunned for a moment, but he couldn't say anything. "Fat, am I really absorbing Manjusaka's power?" Nyetian asked in a deep voice as his eyes trembled. "Of course." The fat cat laughed and said, "Nyetian, you're really lucky this time. If you absorb so much Manjusaka, I wonder how much your strength will skyrocket." "Silly cat, you're thinking too much." At this time, Liolio's voice rang out, "Nyetian's body has awakened a total of 64 demonic gods and demons. Even if there's an ocean of Manjusaka in front of him, the amount of power he can absorb will still be very limited." The fat cat's expression froze after hearing Liolio's words. "I didn't think of this. The power of gods and demons can indeed absorb Manjusaka's power, but it's a pity that Nyetian's body has only awakened 64 demonic gods and demons. Let's not worry about that for now. Let's absorb as much as we can." At this moment, Nyetian's eyes flickered and blazed with excitement. He laughed and said, "It's not too much to ask that I quickly break through to the third rank of the half-saint realm with 64 strands of fiend god energy, right?" With a thought, the demonic gods and demons surged out from his body and formed a protective barrier around him. Following this, his figure flickered and flew towards a red ribbon condensed from Manjusaka. Shirtonghu's eyes trembled when he saw Nyetian's sudden movement and cried out, "Stinking brat, what are you trying to do? What do you think?" Nyetian laughed and increased his speed. "Lord Nyetian, wait for us." Upon seeing this, Tai Chingfeng and the others were so scared that their eyes trembled. With a shout, they followed after Nyetian. Nyetian was their last hope, so they naturally had to follow him closely. "He's trying to absorb Manjusaka's power." In the next instant, Shirtonghu suddenly understood and shouted to the Shir clan's cultivators behind him, "Quick, stop him, kill him!" Yes. More than a dozen Shir family martial artists responded in unison. Then, they moved in unison, rushing towards Nyetian. Shirtonghu was not worried that Nyetian would absorb Manjusaka's power. After all, there were so many Manjusaka here, how much could Nyetian absorb? What he was worried about was Nyetian destroying the Scarlet Blood Sacrificial Array. The Scarlet Blood Sacrificial Array was built by the Cloud Buddha Shir clan through countless generations to open the path to the Scarlet Blood Sacrificial Array, allowing the Shir clan's people to enter the legendary sacred world of Samsara. Sacred world. These two simple words represented the most fatal temptation for all the cultivators in the domain. No matter what, they couldn't let Nyetian get close to the Scarlet Blood Sacrificial Array. "Do you think you can stop me with just the likes of you?" Nyetian sneered disdainfully at the sight of the Shir family's warriors rushing towards him. Even the strongest of them, Shirtonghu, was not a match for him, so how could he put these small fries in his eyes? Boom, boom, boom. At this time, more than a dozen Shir clan's cultivators attacked at the same time, one after another, like a tsunami crashing down on Nyetian. 8 Desolation Sword. Nyetian's eyes narrowed slightly as the star Heavenly Slash appeared in his hand. He slashed out madly, and an incomparably violent sword intent burst forth. At this time, Nyetian was closer to Manjasaka, absorbing more power from the fiend god's sword intent. Therefore, the power of the fiend god's sword intent was even more terrifying. Boom! Bang bang bang! Violent explosions reverberated in the void. Countless violent attacks were directly shattered by the impact of the sword shadows. In the midst of a series of muffled sounds, more than 10 Sure family's martial artists were sent flying backwards from the impact. One slash, just one slash, but the power that Nyetian had erupted was enough to make people tremble. In the next moment, Nyetian let out a cold laugh and moved. He stretched out his hand, and a violent force rushed out toward the red spider lilies that filled the sky. He wanted to crush Manjasaka to pieces so that he could absorb the power within faster. Stop! But at this moment, a clear voice suddenly rang out. After that, a majestic energy descended from the sky, incomparably heavy, releasing a terrifying pressure. Nyetian suddenly felt the space around him sink. He couldn't help but narrow his eyes and immediately reacted. Without looking, he stabbed his sword towards the sky. Bang! But at this moment the terrifying force in the sky descended. With a muffled sound, Nyetian's figure suddenly sank and fell down. Chapter 2897. Rain sword will in midair. Nyetian's figure was rapidly descending. His eyes were slightly trembling as he saw a red-robed girl standing high up in the sky. The girl looked very young, only about 18 or 19 years old, and her actual age was definitely not that old. However, her strength was extremely powerful, and she was actually a first-level demi-saint. To be able to reach the level of a demi-saint at such a young age, this girl was definitely a genius. Lord Nyetian. Tai Ching-fong and the others shouted nervously when they saw that Nyetian was suddenly pushed back. Nyetian's astral wings spread open in midair, and with a sudden flap, he instantly stabilized his figure. Huh! High up in the sky, the red-robed girl seemed to be very surprised when she saw that Nyetian was not seriously injured after taking her palm strike. Nyetian's figure froze, his eyes glinting coldly as he stared at the red-robed girl without saying a word. How dare you destroy the Scarlet Blood sacrificial array, you madman! At this moment the red-robed girl spoke. Her voice was clear and melodious, and although she was angry, there was no killing intent in it. Her palm strike just now was only to stop Nyetian, and not to kill Nyetian. Eighth young lady. It was at this moment that the martial artists of the Sure family came to their senses and shouted in shock when they saw the red-robed girl. They clearly did not expect that the eighth young lady, Sure Lulan, would actually appear here. Eighth young lady? When Nyetian heard how the martial artists of the Sure family addressed Sure Lulan, he immediately realized that the red-robed girl in front of him must have a high status in the Sure family. However, Sure Lulan's aura was gentle, without a hint of violence, and it was clear that she was a young girl who had not experienced the affairs of the world. Eighth young lady, this person is audacious. Not only did he trespass into the Cloudy Buddha Peak, he even killed a martial artist of our Sure family and injured this subordinate. Please, eighth young lady, kill this person. At this moment, Sure Tonghu came to Sure Lulan's side with the help of a martial artist of the Sure family, staring coldly at Nyetian. Sure Lulan exclaimed in surprise once again. She stared at Nyetian with eyes brimming with anger as she asked in a heavy voice, "Did you really kill someone from the Sure clan? They were the ones who attacked me first. Am I not allowed to fight back? Am I supposed to just stand there and wait for death?" Nyetian responded with a faint smile, and his pale face recovered. "How dare you? Trespassing on the Cloudy Buddha Peak is a capital offense. On top of that, you also killed Sure family's martial artists, adding to your death. With eighth young miss here today, don't even think of leaving this place alive." Sure Tonghu roared without waiting for Sure Lulan to speak. He had repeatedly emphasized Nie Tian's crimes because he wanted Shi Lulan to know that Nie Tian was an unforgivable person. Humph! Nie Tianling laughed and said, "Us coming to Cloudy Buddha Peak was clearly a trap set up by your Shi clan." "Bullshit!" Shi Tonghu bellowed. There was a trace of panic in his eyes, and he could not help glancing at Shi Lulan as if he had a guilty conscience. Shi Tonghu suddenly bowed and said to Shi Lulan, "Eighth young miss, please kill this man. Kill this man." The other Shi family's martial artists had also arrived. All of them bowed to Shi Lulan and said in unison. Shi Lulan's delicate face looked a little awkward when she saw this scene. She had never killed anyone in her entire life. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed as he looked at Shi Lulan, Shi Tonghu, and the others. With his intelligence, how could he not see that Shi Tonghu was hiding something from Shi Lulan? Shi Tonghu wanted to borrow Shi Lulan's hand to kill Nie Tian. "Eighth young miss, this man killed our Shi family's martial artists." Shi Tonghu's eyes darkened when he saw that Shi Lulan was still hesitating. He spoke in a heavy tone, his face filled with righteous indignation. Shi Lulan's eyes flickered and she finally nodded. "Do it." Nie Tian looked at Shi Lulan and said with a faint smile on his face, "Murderer, how dare you act so insolently?" Shi Lulan's eyes quivered and a trace of coldness finally surged in her eyes. In the next moment she moved at an extremely fast speed. Like a streak of light, her aura surged madly as she pressed down on Nie Tian. In the next moment, a blue long sword appeared in her hand. This long sword had a very strange shape. It was in a liquid state, like a ball of water that had condensed into the shape of a sword. At this moment, Shi Lulan's aura instantly turned into sword force. Sword intent flowed around her body like rain and water, a very strange sight. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed and his expression darkened. He had not expected Shi Lulan to be a swordsman, and a very terrifying swordsman at that. Judging from Shi Lulan's sword intent, she was actually a legendary swordsman who had reached the legendary realm of martial arts and sword as one. At such a young age, she had reached such a terrifying realm of sword Dao. Shi Lulan could be called a prodigy in sword Dao. Boundless flowing water. Shi Lulan's eyes flickered and she spoke in a cold voice. The silk rain mist silver in her hand shot out, and in an instant, the sword intent of the rain filled the sky, and like a raging waterfall, it pressed down on Nie Tian. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly, and then the corners of his mouth curled up into a smile. Shi Lulan was very strong, and she was a legendary swordsman who had reached the legendary realm of martial arts and sword as one. To him, she was a good opponent. Godly sword. In the next moment, Nie Tian reacted. With a low bellow, he stabbed out with the starlight heaven slash. A sword shadow whizzed out, streaking across the void like a ray of light. Bang! Two powerful sword intents collided with each other, causing the void to tremble violently. An enormous energy fluctuation visible to the naked eye appeared in the air, spreading out in all directions like a giant ripple. Nie Tian and Shi Lulan's figures retreated at the same time and stabilized themselves at the same time. This. Shi Tonghu and the Shi family's cultivators were shocked by the scene before them. They could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. They had not expected that Nie Tian would be able to fight on par with Shi Lulan with just the strength of his sword Dao. After all, Shi Lulan was the most talented swordsman in the Shi family. High up in the sky, Shi Lulan exclaimed in surprise. Her beautiful eyes narrowed abruptly and she could not conceal the astonishment on her face as she exclaimed, "How can your sword intent be so strong?" She had long sensed that Nie Tian only had the strength of a second-order half-saint, and his sword Dao was only at the peak of martial arts and sword as one. A swordsman like him would not be able to withstand a single blow from her. However, Nie Tian was able to face her head-on without falling into a disadvantageous position. In fact, Sure Lulan could even sense that her sword intent was weaker than Nie Tian's. If it wasn't for the fact that her martial Dao strength far surpassed Nie Tian's, she would have been at a disadvantage in this clash. Eighth young lady, it's not that my sword intent is too strong, but your heart is too soft. You don't want to kill me at all. Nie Tian smiled faintly. Although his expression was calm, he was inwardly shocked. He had to admit that the strength of Sure Liolan's sword intent had exceeded his expectations. Sure Liolan's sword intent was obviously of the water attribute, but the moment her sword intent erupted, it was as violent as fire. If Nie Tian had not used the celestial demon sword intent, he would not have been able to withstand Sure Liolan's attack. However, he could tell that although Sure Liolan's sword intent was strong, it did not contain any killing intent. Chapter 2898. The Legendary Swordsman, You. Sure Liolan's eyes quivered at Nie Tian's words. For a moment she was at a loss for words. It was true that she did not want to kill Nie Tian, even if Nie Tian had intruded the cloudy Buddha peak, even if Nie Tian had killed the Sure family's cultivators. At this moment, Sure Lulan wanted to capture Nie Tian and hand him over to the Sure family's punishment hall. But it was obvious that she had underestimated Nie Tian's strength. Eighth miss, this kid's strength is strange. Don't be careless. He has already committed a grave sin by killing the Sure family's cultivators. Eighth miss, please don't hesitate and kill him now. Sure Tonghu could no longer hold back and shouted. He had just been severely injured by Nie Tian, so he knew very well how terrifying Nie Tian was. If Sure Lulan did not have any killing intent, it would be impossible for her to defeat Nie Tian. I understand. Sure Lulan glanced at Sure Tonghu and said impatiently. Eighth miss, that fellow is right. If you don't use your full strength, you won't be able to defeat me. At this time, Nie Tian smiled faintly and said, Don't let your soft-heartedness harm you. Arrogant. Sure Lulan felt provoked when she heard Nie Tian's words. With a shout, the silk rain mist silver attacked. Strands of rain sword intent spread out in the air, as if millions of raindrops had turned into sharp blades that pressed down on Nie Tian with an overwhelming momentum. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly, but there was no fear in them. There was only a calm smile on his face. He had purposely provoked Sure Lulan so that the latter would erupt with an even stronger sword intent. When he clashed with Sure Liolan's sword earlier, he realized that her sword intent had a subtle effect on his own sword intent. On top of that, after he released the power of the demon god's sword intent would absorb Manjusaka's energy, causing his sword intent to rise continuously as if it was reaching its limit. Nie Tian had a premonition that the next battle would be an opportunity for him to achieve a breakthrough in his sword Dao. 9 limits of the starry sky, shatter the earth. Nie Tian felt the rain of sharpness assaulting his face. He did not dare to be careless. On the edge of the starry heavenly slash, endless sword intent surged out. The sword light in the sky flourished, releasing a dazzling sword light. Boom, boom, boom. In the void, the two sword essences collided, and engulfed each other, causing a terrible roar. Nie Tian felt that the sword intent in his body seemed to have been stimulated and was actually getting stronger bit by bit, which made him extremely excited. Bang! 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 Boom! 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 High up in the sky, the sound of explosions rang out incessantly. 2 figures shuttled back and forth amidst the violent sword intent, appearing and disappearing. In the blink of an eye, the two of them had already exchanged more than 10 blows. This! Sure Clan's warriors, Tai Chingfeng, and the others were shocked by the scene in front of them. They felt that they were not watching a life and death battle, but a sword art performance. However, some people had already noticed that during the battle between Nie Tian and Sure Lulan, the two's sword intent was changing. Sure Lulan's sword intent was slowly weakening, while Nie Tian's sword intent was constantly growing stronger. Such an intense battle consumed a lot of sword intent, so it was reasonable for Sir Leolan's sword intent to weaken. However, Nye Tian seemed to have endless sword intent in his body, and he did not feel tired at all. His sword intent did not weaken at all, but instead grew stronger. Not good. There's something strange about the power in this kid's body. He can constantly absorb power from Manjusaka. If this goes on, 8th Miss will lose. Shi Tonghu's eyes were filled with worry as he thought to himself. Captain, what's going on? 8th Miss is actually being suppressed by that kid. At this time, a Shi clan's warrior noticed that something was wrong and asked in astonishment. 8th Miss is a prodigy in sword Dao, but even with her sword Dao strength, she can't beat that kid. This kid is too strange. Another Shi clan's warrior frowned, his face ugly. No one had expected that this battle would turn out like this. Bang! At this time, a muffled sound reverberated in the sky. 2 sword shadows collided and exploded at the same time. Nye Tian's figure was as still as a mountain, while Shi Lulan was pushed back by the violent impact. How is this possible? Shi Lulan steadied herself and looked at Nye Tian with a strange expression on her face. She was extremely shocked. She couldn't understand why Nye Tian's sword intent had grown stronger after exchanging so many sword strikes with her. She felt as if there was an abyss of sword intent hidden in Nye Tian's body, and it contained an inexhaustible sword intent. At this time, the abyss of sword intent in Nye Tian's body was slowly turning violent. 8th Miss, the first sword strike we exchanged was the one that you had the highest chance of beating me with. Nye Tian looked at the shocked Shi Lulan and smiled faintly. If you can't beat me after the first sword strike, it means that you've lost this battle for sure. You're too arrogant. Shi Lulan's beautiful eyes darkened. With a shout, she released all her sword intent once more. Strands of sword intent flowed around her body like rain. She had no killing intent, but she had the pride of a swordsman. Nye Tian's words had completely infuriated her. Very good. Nye Tian felt that Shi Lulan's sword intent had become stronger, but he showed no fear. Instead, he smiled faintly and said, "Come." He wanted to anger Shi Lulan and force her to release sword intent that surpassed her own. At this moment, he could feel that the sword intent in his body had become violent to the extreme. As long as he could surpass this limit, he would achieve a breakthrough in his sword Dao. 8th Miss's sword intent has become stronger. That silver-haired brat is dead meat. The martial artist of the Shi family could feel that Shi Lulan's sword intent had become much stronger, and he could not help but exclaim in surprise. However, Shi Tonghu had an ugly look on his face. He had a feeling that Nye Tian was hatching some sort of scheme. Traceless drizzle. At this moment, the sword intent around Shi Lulan's body had become violent to the extreme. Her beautiful eyes darkened and the corner of her mouth twitched. Then, she moved, and the silver drizzle mist slashed out furiously. Suddenly, a huge shadow of the sword appeared, and like a huge pillar of water falling from the sky, it tore through the air and pressed down on Nye Tian. Buzz! In that instant, the surrounding space suddenly sank. Under the tremendous pressure, a low groan could be heard, as if it was about to split open. Although Shi Lulan was just a level 1 demi-saint, the aura she was displaying was far stronger than that of a level 3 demi-saint like Shi Tonghu. Sacred heaven-defying sword, Earth's sword engulfs the moon. Nye Tian could feel the terrifying pressure of the sword pressing down on him from all directions. His eyes suddenly focused, and the corner of his mouth twitched. The sword intent around his entire body surged to the extreme in an instant, and the starry heavenly slash was unleashed. Boom! Boom! In the void, the 2 sword shadows roared like ancient dragons, and the void trembled under the pressure. Bang! Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the 2 sword shadows collided with a loud bang. The void shook violently, and suddenly, endless sword will surged out from the center of the collision, surging in all directions. Boom! At the same time, Nye Tian's body shook, and a sword aura shot up into the sky. His eyes couldn't help but heat up. Chapter 2899. Can he be stopped? Boom! High up in the sky, a tremendous sword momentum soared into the sky like a giant galloping dragon. Its majestic momentum shook the heavens and earth. Everyone's eyes darkened, and their expressions darkened. Who would have thought that Nietian would have a breakthrough in his swordsmanship at this moment? The impact of the sword momentum from the breakthrough in his swordsmanship directly broke through the raging waves of sword will in the air. Between the heavens and earth, sword will rampaged wildly, wreaking havoc. Rumble! Crack, crack, crack! At this time, the two sword shadows high up in the sky suddenly exploded with a violent force. With a loud bang, they actually began to crumble at the same time. Two figures stood tall in the endless waves of sword chi, like two lofty mountains. But it was obvious that the lofty mountain that was Nietian was the more stable and heavy one. Shirlulan staggered back under the impact of the raging wave. The silk rain mist silver in her hand trembled violently, as if she could no longer hold it. Finally, after enduring for a few seconds, she could no longer bear it. With a shrill cry, her figure retreated madly like a broken leaf in the midst of a raging gale. On the other side, Nietian's figure also retreated several hundred meters, but he soon stabilized himself. Eighth young miss. The Shur family's cultivators cried out in panic when they saw that Shirlulan was injured. Shirlulan was the Shur family patriarch's first wife's daughter, and also his most beloved daughter. It would be terrible if she was injured or killed. Given the Shur family patriarch's temper, once he flew into a rage, the consequences would definitely be terrifying. Fortunately, Shirlulan managed to stabilize herself after retreating several thousand meters. She was in a somewhat sorry state at this moment. Blood trickled down the corner of her mouth, and the hand that held the silk rain mist silver was trembling slightly. The impact of the sword will just now was too terrifying, and Shirlulan's sword nearly slipped out of her hand. On the other hand, Nietian wasn't injured at all. He stood there as steady as a lofty mountain. Everyone's eyes were staring at Nietian, completely dumbfounded, as if they had seen a ghost. Who would have thought that Nietian would achieve a breakthrough in his sword Dao in the last exchange of swords? It seemed like Nietian had been advancing step by step in this battle, slowly infuriating Shirlulan and causing her to erupt with even more powerful sword intent. The strength of his opponent caused Nietian's sword intent to become stronger as well, and it charged towards the limit of his sword intent. In the end, he achieved a breakthrough in the final strike. Shur Tonghu's eyes flickered as he stared at Nietian, and he couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Don't tell me this kid planned all of this? If Nietian's breakthrough was within his expectations, then his meticulousness, perseverance, and boldness were enough to send chills down anyone's spine. Unfortunately, Shur Tonghu was right. This breakthrough was within Nietian's expectations. Eighth young miss, I'm sorry. At this moment, Nietian spoke with a faint smile on his face. You. Shirlulan was no fool. If even Shur Tonghu could think of this, she could naturally sense it as well. Her beautiful eyes trembled and she bellowed, "You're using me." Nietian could clearly sense no killing intent from her, but he had still tried to infuriate her with words. He was clearly using her to break through his own limits. We're just using each other. With a faint smile, Nietian said, "After this battle, the 8th Miss's sword intent has improved, hasn't it?" You. Shirlulan's eyes widened, and she was at a loss for words. Nietian was right. Her sword intent had indeed improved after this battle, but it was not as obvious as Nietian's. Eighth young miss, I'm going to absorb some of Manjasaka's energy. I hope you won't stop me. Eighth young miss spoke again. Eighth young miss should be very clear that in your current state, you won't be able to stop me even if you want to. In your dreams. Shirlulan's eyes flickered hearing Nietian's words. Madman, the scarlet blood sacrificial array is the blood, sweat, and tears of our Shur family. Even if I, Sir Lulan, die, I will not allow you to take half a step closer to the scarlet blood sacrificial array. Nia Tion's eyes narrowed slightly, and he couldn't help but chuckle. Eighth young miss, it seems like you still want to fight me? Until death. A cold light flickered in Sir Lulan's eyes as she uttered icily. Nia Tion's eyes narrowed, thinking, it seems like this little girl is really angry. Why don't we leave this place first? The scarlet blood sacrificial array is so big anyway, why waste time here? With this thought in his mind, Nia Tian smiled faintly. Eighth young miss, you showed mercy to me earlier, so I'm returning the favor now. Forgive me, I won't be accompanying you any longer. Farewell. With that said, Nia Tian looked at Tai Chingfeng's group. Domain Lord Tai, let's go. Eighth young miss, this brat killed our Sher family's people, we can't let him go. Seeing that Nia Tian was about to leave, Sher Tonghu became anxious and shouted at Sher Lulan. Sher Lulan's brows creased into a frown, her face was a little unsightly. She also wanted to make Nia Tian stay, but unfortunately, in her current state, she couldn't. You brat, you're quite the cheerful one. Nia Tian chuckled, his piercing gaze fixed on Sher Tonghu. You always let your eighth young miss make a move, why don't you do it yourself? Sher Tonghu's face stiffened, turning extremely ugly. His chest felt stifled, unable to utter a single word. Of course he wanted to make a move, but he was already heavily injured by Nia Tian. If he were to make a move now, wouldn't that be courting death? Humph! Nia Tianling snorted. Why don't you take a look at eighth young miss' current state? Do you think she can stop me? With that said, Nia Tian's figure flickered, ready to leave. He guessed that the battle just now must have alerted many people, and if he continued to stay here, he would be in big trouble. From the looks of it, the scarlet blood sacrificial array still needed some time to activate. Moreover, his purpose in coming to the Cloudy Buddha Peak had nothing to do with the scarlet blood sacrificial array. He was here for Manjusaka. Still, if the people of the Cloudy Buddha Peak wanted to use his blood to activate Manjusaka, he would certainly resist to the end. However, just as Nia Tian was about to leave, a deep and powerful voice rang out. If eighth young sister can't stop you, can I? A black-robed figure descended from the sky, and the surrounding void suddenly sank under the pressure of his aura. An elite. Nia Tian's eyes suddenly focused, and he turned to look up into the sky, where he saw a black-robed man with a gloomy expression. The man was very young, and his real age was probably around 1,000 years old. However, his aura was extremely powerful, and he was as mighty as a mountain just by standing there. A rank 5 demi-saint. Nia Tian's heart sank as he used his divine sense to sense the man. That man was actually a rank 5 demi-saint. A rank 5 demi-saint. This was the strongest person Nia Tian had encountered since he entered the Sea of Bitterness Cliff. Third young master. Sher Tonghu's eyes trembled when he saw the black-robed man, and he cried out in surprise. Third brother. Sher Lulan's beautiful eyes also flashed when she saw the black-robed man, and she called out. Chapter 2900. A powerful martial body. Nia Tian's eyes narrowed when he heard how Sher Tonghu and Sher Lulan addressed the black-robed man. It seemed that the black-robed man's identity was not simple either. Third young master. At that moment, Sher Tonghu's figure flashed to Sher Lingfeng's side and said, This man killed a martial artist of our Sher family. Third young master, please kill this man. The same words, just that he had changed the target of his request. You're dead meat for killing a martial artist of the Sher family. Sher Lingfeng's eyes darkened as he looked at Nia Tian with a cold voice, his eyes filled with murderous intent. Unlike Sher Lulan, he would never show any mercy to Nia Tian. Just in time. Let me see how much my sword will has improved after breaking through to the legendary realm of sword and martial arts as one. Nia Tian looked at Sher Lingfeng fearlessly and said with a faint smile. Presumptuous! Sher Lingfeng roared madly. After which, his silhouette flickered as a tyrannical aura gushed forth from his body. waves of violent energy gushed forth in the air, transforming into a gigantic hurricane. Instantly, the surrounding space darkened as the weather changed color. A wind attribute martial artist. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed as he realized that Shi Lingfeng was a wind attribute martial artist. Shi Lingfeng's face darkened and he became much more cautious. Compared to other martial artists, wind attribute martial artists were much more frightening. Their attacks were swift, and lethal. Although Shi Lingfeng was a rank 5 demi-saint, his combat strength was definitely comparable to a rank 6 or even a rank 7 demi-saint. The Shi family martial artists' eyes lit up when they saw how fierce and murderous Shi Lingfeng was. Who would have thought that the third young master is already a rank 5 demi-saint? With the third young master's combat strength, that brat will die no matter how heaven-defying he is. Just you wait. That silver-haired brat will definitely be killed by the third young master in one move. The Shi family martial artists' eyes lit up as if they could already see the scene of Nie Tian being killed by Shi Lingfeng in one move. On the other side, Shi Liulan's beautiful eyes were trembling as she thought to herself, third brother won't really kill him, right? But in the next moment she felt conflicted in her heart. He killed someone from my Shi clan, why should I worry for him? The conflict in Shi Liulan's heart made her look at Nie Tian with a complicated gaze. Hua! Just at this moment, the hurricane in the sky moved, stirring up tens of thousands of remnant clouds. The heavens and earth howled, the void roared, and an aura as violent as the raging sea surged out, pressing down on Nie Tian. 12 heaven-slaying sword formation, activate. Facing Shi Lingfeng's all-out attack, Nie Tian's eyes narrowed. He didn't dare to be careless in the slightest. Sword intent gushed out from his body in a frenzy, and sword runes appeared beneath his feet as he activated the sword array. Boom, boom, boom. Sword shadows soared into the sky like giants, roaring at the sky. A puny sword formation wants to stop me? Shi Lingfeng sneered, the killing intent in his eyes intensified. He didn't think that Nie Tian's sword formation would be able to withstand a single strike from him. Boom! At this moment, the 12 heaven-slaying sword shadows gathered in an instant, condensing into a giant sword shadow, and rose into the sky. Boom! In the next instant, the sword shadow collided with the hurricane, and a loud explosion was heard in the air. At this moment, the heavens and earth darkened, and the wind and clouds turned chilly. Seeing this scene, the crowd couldn't help but tremble, and their hearts were filled with shock. No one had expected that Nie Tian would use his sword intent to block Shi Lingfeng's attack in an instant. Chi. Following this, piercing sounds were heard in the void, and the giant sword shadow was rapidly shattered under the impact of the hurricane. Nie Tian's eyes trembled slightly, and then he moved and started to retreat. He already had a feeling that he wouldn't be able to stop Shi Lingfeng if he fought head-on. Boom! At this moment, the hurricane actually shattered the sword shadow, and then it turned into thousands of wind blades, covering the sky and covering the earth, pressing towards Nie Tian. A violent, murderous aura surged in the air. In the void, dark clouds surged, and the heavens and earth were solemn. Although Nie Tian's figure was fast, he couldn't be faster than the sharp wind blades. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Countless sharp wind blades slashed across the sky, as though the heavens and earth were about to be torn apart in an instant. Nie Tian couldn't dodge, and his eyes were fixed on the golden sky battle armor. At the same time, he also activated the shield of astral souls. Bang, bang, bang. Countless wind blades bombarded, and Nie Tian's figure rapidly retreated. Crack, crack, crack. However, at this moment, the shield around his body couldn't withstand the wind blades anymore, and it began to slowly shatter. Humph! Shi Lingfeng saw this scene from high up in the sky, and smiled coldly. Brat, you're dead, he said in a cold voice. With such a dense and fierce attack, Nie Tian's shield wouldn't be able to withstand it for long. Bang! As soon as Shi Lingfeng's voice fell, A muffled sound rang out, and the shield around Nye Tian's body directly shattered. Immediately after, his figure was submerged in the endless wind blades. He's dead. Shi Tonghu and the others' eyes trembled, and they exclaimed in shock. Their faces were somewhat lifeless, as though they couldn't believe that Nye Tian had died just like that. Lord Nye Tian. Tai Ching-feng and the others' eyes widened in shock, and they screamed shrilly. At this moment, they hoped more than ever that Nye Tian was still alive. If Nye Tian was dead, they wouldn't have a chance to live. Is he really dead? Shi Liulan's beautiful eyes trembled slightly, but she couldn't see Nye Tian's figure. Her heart sank inexplicably, as though she had been dealt a heavy blow. Humph humph. Shi Lingfeng smiled cold and said, "Under this young man's sky full of wind blades, there's no reason for him to survive." However, before he could finish his sentence, a mocking voice was heard. "Is that so?" The indifferent voice was very calm, but it sounded extremely provocative at this moment. A bloodied figure walked out from the void, appearing in front of the crowd. Lord Nye Tian. Tai Ching-feng's eyes narrowed, and he was so excited that he almost jumped up. The bloodied figure's face was even covered in blood, but Tai Ching-feng could still recognize it at a glance. It was Nye Tian. He's not dead. The eyes of Shi Tonghu and the others trembled as they exclaimed in shock. Nye Tian was still alive. This was something they had never expected. In the midst of the dense and sharp wind blades, Nye Tian, who had lost the protection of the shield, had relied on his flesh and blood to resist the wind blades. Was this possible? Nye Tian's martial Dao talent was monstrous enough, and his sword intent was so terrifying, but his martial physique seemed to be even more powerful, to the point that it made people's hair stand on end. Shi Lingfeng stared at Nye Tian, and his expression froze for a few seconds, before he yelled out in shock, "Impossible!" If it weren't for his rationality, he would have thought that he was dreaming. A second-order half-saint had relied on his flesh and martial physique to resist his wind blades. This had toppled his understanding of the martial Dao. Chapter 2901. Red Pearl Blossoms. It's not that my martial body is too strong, it's that your wind blades are not sharp enough. High up in the sky, Nye Tian looked at Shi Lingfeng and smiled cold. Then, his body shook and the blood stains on his body were washed away. Although his face was a little pale, his eyes were still sharp. "You are worthy of my seriousness." Shi Lingfeng looked at Nye Tian, his eyes suddenly focused, and his gaze was deep and cold. The strength of Nye Tian's martial body was beyond his imagination, which made him have to re-evaluate the opponent in front of him. Before this, he did not regard Nye Tian as a real opponent. In his eyes, Nye Tian was just an ant-like existence. But now, he had to face it. Humph. Nye Tianling smiled coldly and said, "You are serious, so what?" On the surface, Nye Tian was arrogant, but in his heart, he was very cautious. He was very afraid of Shi Lingfeng. Shi Lingfeng's strength was stronger than he had imagined, even stronger than Nangong Jueming of the Nangong family he had killed before. In the exchange just now, Nye Tian was already in a very dangerous situation. If it was not for his divine demon power, which could constantly absorb the power of Manjusaka that escaped from the space, it was hard to say whether he could stand up at this moment. Moreover, the existence of Manjusaka also made his sword intent exert a stronger power. In addition, he had just been promoted to a legendary swordsman, so he was able to block Shi Lingfeng's attack. If it were not for these reasons, Shi Lingfeng's attack just now would have taken his life. At this time, Liuyo's voice sounded, "Nye Tian, do you need more power?" Nye Tian's eyes suddenly narrowed, but he shook his head. Of course, he knew that Lulu wanted to stimulate the Holy Soul Curse Seal in his body. But now, he did not want to use the Holy Soul Curse Seal. On one hand, the Holy Soul Curse Seal was extremely harmful to the martial body. If he used it frequently, his martial body would be damaged, which would directly affect the increase of his strength. Therefore, he would not use the Holy Soul Curse Seal unless it was a life and death situation. On the other hand, he sensed that the God-Fiend's sword could unleash even greater power under the stimulation of Manjasaka. At this moment, he was already a legendary swordsman. If he was at his limit, he might be able to break through to the transcending God realm. If his swordsmanship could advance to the supreme God realm, it would be a qualitative leap for Nye Tian. Generally speaking, the Sword Dao realm and the martial artist's martial Dao realm would increase at the same time. However, there were also exceptions. Some people's martial Dao realm was very low, but they could rely on their powerful sword intent to challenge experts of a higher level. Just like Eternally Merciless, the reason why he was able to surpass experts of the same level was because of his sword Dao cultivation. Eternally Merciless and the Dean of the Holy Soul Academy, Kuyo Oniguchi, were both Stage 9 pseudo-saints. However, the strength that Eternally Merciless displayed completely crushed Kuyo Oniguchi. Eternally Merciless' terror lay in his sword Dao realm. Nye Tian guessed that Eternally Merciless' sword Dao realm might have already surpassed the transcending God realm. At this moment, Nye Tian had just broken through to the legendary swordsman. However, he wanted to take a risk and use Shi Lingfeng's pressure and Manjasaka's stimulation to break through to the transcending God realm. Nye Tian, what are you thinking? Do you still want to break through? At this moment, Fat Cat's voice rang out. In his opinion, the current Nye Tian was already at the moment of life and death. However, Nye Tian actually didn't use the Holy Soul Curse Seal. This was undoubtedly a gamble with his life. How would I know if I don't try? Nye Tian smiled faintly. His eyes revealed calmness and determination. Kid, you can still smile when you're about to die. When Shi Lingfeng saw that Nye Tian actually smiled, his eyes turned cold. With a low roar, he raised his palms and the void on both sides of him suddenly sank. It was actually compressed to the point that it instantly tightened. Boom! Boom! In the next moment, Shi Lingfeng struck out with both palms and 2 hurricanes appeared in the void. They were even more violent and fierce than the previous hurricane. This time, Shi Lingfeng was really angry and attacked with all his might. Sacred Heaven-defying sword, Earth sword swallows the moon. Nye Tian's eyes trembled and he instantly raised the sword intent around his body to the extreme. Then, he struck out with Starlight Heavenly Slash. Boom! The sword shadow whistled and thunder roared. It was like a wild beast roaring between heaven and earth. The crowd couldn't help but shiver and their hearts were filled with astonishment. Even though Nye Tian was seriously injured, he was still able to explode with such a powerful sword intent. It was really too terrifying. Although Nye Tian's strength was ordinary, the power in his body seemed to be limitless. Boom! Boom! Then, in the sky, the sword's shadow collided with the 2 hurricanes, causing a terrifying explosion. The heavens and earth shook and the space trembled. Endless wild power raged crazily, as if it was going to destroy everything. Boom, 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 chi, chi, chi. In the space, the violent explosion was accompanied by the whistling of the wind and the tearing sound of the sword intent. It was extremely violent. At this moment, the heavens and earth trembled. Boom! Crack, crack, crack. At this moment, a hurricane suddenly moved and actually split in half. At the same time, the sword's shadow was also forcibly torn apart by the terrifying force of the wind. In the next moment, another gust of wind pierced through the void like a raging dragon and crashed down towards Nye Tian. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed, but he wasn't afraid at all. Numerous black magical symbols swirled madly around him, making him look like a devil god. At the same time, streams of mysterious, invisible power were madly converging on Nye Tian's body, forming an invisible suit of armor. This was the demonic force absorbing Manjasaka's power. It was extremely strange. Although Manjasaka was in a dormant state, the demonic force's terrifying power forcibly absorbed Manjasaka's power. Buzz! At this moment, the violent hurricane descended and the space let out a low hum. At this moment, Nye Tian clearly felt the surrounding space become distorted under the pressure of the violent force. Shi Lingfeng's strength was really terrifying. Boom! Crack, crack, crack! In the next instant, the hurricane descended and hit Nye Tian's body, colliding with the demonic force and tearing it apart bit by bit. It was extremely terrifying. Nye Tian could feel the demonic force outside his body slowly disintegrating, which made his face unsightly. He had still underestimated Shi Lingfeng's strength. Boom! After a few seconds, the demonic force finally couldn't hold on any longer and directly collapsed. In an instant, the terrifying force directly hit Nye Tian's body and actually tore it apart, causing his entire body to become a bloody mess. This tragic scene made everyone's eyes tremble and their expressions stiffen. However, at the same time, the manjasaka on the ground suddenly blossomed and the scarlet petals released a dazzling light. Previously, the manjasaka had only been bright red like blood, but now it really blossomed and actually released a scarlet halo like a ripple that spread across the space. Chapter 2902. Demonic blood. High up in the sky, Nye Tian's body cracked inch by inch under the impact of the hurricane. Bloody wounds opened up on his body, and blood gushed out like a fountain. His entire body was drenched in blood. But at this moment, a scarlet-red halo appeared in the space. It was like a rainbow, but there was only one color. It was as red as blood. In that instant, Nye Tian felt a strange power surging within his body, as though some kind of power had been awakened. Immediately after, the scarlet halo spread to his body and was directly absorbed by him. At this moment, he felt a scorching power surge through his body, but it did not hurt him. Instead, it was healing his body at a speed visible to the naked eye. As for the violent and fierce hurricane, it was struck by the scarlet halo and actually shook for a moment. Then, it began to slowly shatter and quickly disappeared. In an extremely short period of time, the world regained its calm, as if the intense scene from before had never happened. At this moment, everyone was looking at the scene in the sky with dazed expressions on their faces. High up in the sky, streaks of crimson halos flowed. They were gentle like rain, and they flowed continuously into Nye Tian's body. Under the gaze of countless pairs of eyes, the wound on Nye Tian's body actually healed in an instant. Furthermore, Nye Tian's face was no longer as pale as it had been before, and his aura had also recovered. How is this possible? After a long time, some people were shocked by the scene before them. Their eyes were filled with disbelief. No matter how stupid Shi family martial artists were, they could see that what Nye Tian was absorbing was Manjasaka's power. Nye Tian had absorbed Manjasaka's power, his wounds had healed, and his condition had recovered. None of this was strange. Of course, the warriors of Shi family knew how powerful Manjasaka was. He could even bring the dead back to life and regrow flesh and bones. Nye Tian's injuries were not a problem at all. The strangest thing was, how did Nye Tian absorb Manjasaka's power? Manjasaka had another name, the flower of scarlet blood. Manjasaka would remain in a dormant state without the stimulation of fresh blood. But now, under the stimulation of a strange power, the Manjasaka actually bloomed. After Nye Tian recovered, the scarlet halo in the sky quickly disappeared, and the Manjasaka on the ground slowly returned to its dormant state. What's going on? Nye Tian was stunned. He didn't know what had just happened. The blood of the gods and demons is indeed powerful. At this moment, the fat cat's voice rang out as she exclaimed. Indeed, it seems like the godfiend blood had a great effect on Manjasaka, causing Manjasaka to bloom for a short period of time. The Ghost Emperor's voice also rang out, and he was just as shocked. Fiend god blood. Nye Tian was taken aback for a moment before he asked in astonishment, "Are you saying that Manjasaka was stimulated by my blood, and that's why it bloomed?" Yes. The fat cat and the Ghost Emperor nodded at the same time. This isn't quite possible. Nie Tian was stunned, and a look of disbelief appeared on his face. He was tens of thousands of meters away from Manjusaka, yet Manjusaka was stimulated. This was a little too exaggerated. Nie Tian, Manjusaka needs fresh blood to stimulate it. The fat cat laughed and said, but not everyone's fresh blood can make Manjusaka bloom. The stronger the power of the bloodline, the stronger the stimulation of Manjusaka. If it's blood with weak bloodline power, Manjusaka won't bloom even if it's soaked in it. However, if it's blood with strong bloodline power, even if it's just surging blood chi, it can still stimulate Manjusaka to bloom. Previously, your fiend god power only contained the aura of fiend god blood, yet it was able to absorb Manjusaka's power, not to mention now that your blood is gushing out and your blood chi is dispersing. Nie Tian's eyes froze when he heard the fat cat's words, his face filled with shock. He never imagined that the fiend god blood would be so strong. Blood. It's his blood. At this time, Shi Lingfeng finally came to his senses and cried out in shock. He looked at Nie Tian with burning greed in his eyes. Only now did he realize that the thing that stimulated Manjusaka's bloom was Nie Tian's blood. He simply couldn't imagine that a person's blood could be so powerful. Manjusaka was the Shi family's flower. A long time ago, the Shi family's ancestor absorbed Manjusaka's power and fused it into his own bloodline. Thus, Manjusaka became the Shi family's bloodline power. The blood of all the Shi family's cultivators could stimulate Manjusaka's bloom. But even the Shi family's strongest person couldn't stimulate Manjusaka's bloom with their blood chi. But Nie Tian did it. Shi Lingfeng naturally knew that the Shi family needed a large amount of blood to stimulate Manjusaka's bloom in order to open the path of scarlet blood. Only then could they open the entrance to the sacred world of samsara. Nie Tian's blood was so powerful that he alone could stimulate all the Manjusaka's bloom. At this time, there was only one thought in Shi Lingfeng's mind, and that was to capture Nie Tian. Looks like you want to use my blood to open the so-called scarlet blood path, ah. Nie Tian was a smart man. Seeing Shi Lingfeng's expression, he immediately guessed what was on the latter's mind. Shi Lingfeng's eyes narrowed at Nie Tian's words, his face filled with astonishment. He never imagined that Nie Tian would know about the scarlet blood path. Shi Lingfeng turned around abruptly and stared at Shi Tonghu's group with killing intent in his eyes. Shi Tonghu's group waved their hands repeatedly. Their faces were uglier than if they had eaten shit, implying that they weren't the ones who leaked the scarlet blood path to Nie Tian. Brat, even if you can absorb Manjusaka's energy, you won't be able to escape death today. Shi Lingfeng smiled cold and his figure moved, charging straight at Nie Tian. Violent energy surged from his body, condensing into a terrifying hurricane battle armor around his body. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly, and the corners of his mouth curled into a cold smile. Just now, when he absorbed Manjusaka's energy, other than healing his injuries and recovering his condition, his strength had also increased. At this time, he was already a third-order half-saint. The increase from second-order half-saint to third-order half-saint was not significant, and to Nie Tian, it was better than nothing. With Nie Tian's current combat strength, even if he were to become a ninth-order half-saint, his combat strength would not increase by much. It was only when he reached the threshold of demi-saint that his combat ability would experience another qualitative leap. Still, an increase in strength was certainly a good thing for him, as it meant that he had taken another step towards the demi-saint stage. Kill! At this moment, Shi Lingfeng roared madly and violently slammed his palm down. The giant palm formed from a hurricane descended with incredible sharpness, as if it was going to tear the sky apart. Nie Tian did not dare to be careless. The sword will around his body was released in a frenzy as he slashed out with the starry heavenly slash. Instantly, sword shadows howled out like raging wave. Boom! A loud rumble resounded in the void as a terrifying power rampaged in the space. At this moment, dozens of figures appeared in the distant void, stepping through the air. Chapter 29:03. Don't kill him. Rumble, rumble, rumble. In the void, a terrifying and violent force surged in the space. Both Nie Tian and Shi Lingfeng retreated at the same time, before steadying themselves at the same time. Nie Tian's strength had improved a little, and he also had the boost from Manjusaka, whereas Shi Lingfeng's strength had been greatly depleted, and his strength was much weaker than before. Under such circumstances, the two were actually equally matched in a head-on clash. However, in the very next moment, Nie Tian could see dozens of figures appearing in the void in the distance, and he could not help but narrow his eyes. He certainly knew that these were the martial artists of the Shi family, and they were obviously here for him. I must leave at once. Nie Tian's eyes darkened, and his figure moved as he prepared to leave at once. With his current strength, it was already very strenuous for him to fight against Shi Lingfeng alone. If the other martial artists of the Shi family were to arrive, there was no way he could escape. Trying to escape? Dream on. Shi Lingfeng was no fool. His face darkened and he sneered. Wild winds surged around him, and a hurricane appeared, howling madly as it engulfed Nie Tian. Nie Tian's expression changed slightly, and he wildly swept out with his sword. The shadow of the sword blocked the hurricane, but it caused his body to pause and his speed to abruptly slow down. Humph! Shi Lingfeng sneered coldly, his eyes surging with malevolence. With Nie Tian blocked by him, there was no way he could escape now. Oh no! Nie Tian steadied himself, and his face darkened when he saw that the dozens of martial artists of the Shi family had arrived. He could sense from afar that these dozens of martial artists of the Shi family were all demi-saints, and they were very frightening. Third young master. In the very next moment, the dozens of martial artists of the Shi family came to Shi Lingfeng's side, bowing and calling out in unison. Do it. Capture him alive. Shi Lingfeng said coldly, his eyes cold as ice. Yes. The martial artists of the Shi family responded solemnly, and their figures immediately moved to surround Nie Tian. Nie Tian could feel a powerful pressure coming from the surrounding space, and his face could not help but turn ugly. Brat, I want to see how heaven-defying you are. Shi Lingfeng spoke coldly. He did not believe that a demi-saint like Nie Tian could escape from dozens of demi-saint. Luck. Just as Shi Lingfeng's voice fell, dozens of Shi family's experts moved at the same time, attacking in unison. In the void, dozens of violent forces blasted out, pressing down on Nie Tian. In the blink of an eye, Nie Tian suddenly felt the space around him sink, making him feel suffocated. Spell formation. Right at that moment, the fat cat's scream rang out, filled with unconcealable panic. Nie Tian's face darkened in an instant. He did not expect that these Shi family martial artists would actually form a formation. In the first place, dozens of demi-saint martial artists were already a great threat to Nie Tian, and now that they had joined forces to form a formation, the pressure would increase exponentially. Meanwhile, in the air, the power unleashed by the Shi family martial artists actually condensed into a lock rune, turning into 9 great shackles that pressed down on Nie Tian's body. Boom! In an instant, Nie Tian could feel a terrible pressure emanating from the space around him, as if countless giant hands were gripping him tightly. Furthermore, the terrifying pressure was still increasing at an alarming rate, as if it was going to crush Nie Tianxing to death. Humph! Brat, let's see how long you can hold on. Shi Lingfeng smiled coldly at the sight, his eyes cold and murderous. He estimated that Nie Tian would not be able to hold on for much longer. Boom! But that was when Nie Tian's body shuddered, the sword will around him unleashing wildly, and a terrible presence shot into the air. Huh! The eyes of every Shi family martial artist trembled, and they could not help but cry out in surprise as their faces stiffened. At that moment, Nie Tian was actually going to forcibly break free of the pressure. With his ability, wanting to break free of the pressure was undoubtedly risking his life. Madman! Shi Lingfeng's eyes trembled as he bellowed, his expression sinister and malicious. He did not expect that Nie Tian would not yield at all and would fight with his life on the line. He had wanted to capture Nie Tian alive, since the latter's blood was too precious. But if Nie Tian did not yield, he could not be blamed for being ruthless, and could only kill him. Bone-eroding soul shackling chains, go! That was when Nie Tian bellowed, his entire being turning into a berserk beast. Soon, 9 shackles appeared around his body and shot out, crashing against the lock rune in the air. Bang! 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 A terrible dull sound echoed in the air, and the lock rune finally loosened after being struck. Good chance! Nie Tian felt the pressure around him lessening. His eyes flickered as a pair of astral soul wings appeared on his back. With a sudden flap, his silhouette soared into the sky. Huh! The dozens of Shi family martial artists were stunned. They had not expected that Nie Tian would be able to break free from their pressure. Kill him! On the other side, Shi Lingfeng's gaze turned cold as he coldly commanded. Since they could not capture Nie Tian, they could only resort to killing him. Yes! The Shi family's martial artists responded, their voices shaking the heavens. Their silhouettes moved in unison, causing the surrounding space to tremble. Nie Tian frowned, and with a violent slash of his sword, his silhouette rapidly retreated. He wanted to buy himself some time, but he had clearly underestimated the strength of the Shi family's martial artists. These Shi family's martial artists had a tacit understanding with each other, and their auras were linked together. Nie Tian's sword shadows posed no threat to them. Boom! A tremendous pressure once again pressed down, causing the space around them to sink. The terrifying pressure was akin to a raging tsunami, enveloping Nie Tian. Nie Tian's wings flapped, but he discovered that the space around him was incomparably heavy, causing his speed to become extremely slow. Kill! At this time, the dozens of Shi family's martial artists roared in unison, attacking at the same time. Countless streams of energy condensed into a giant crimson palm in the air, sweeping everything in its path. Damn it! Nie Tian's expression darkened, as he cursed in his heart. This palm strike was unavoidable. His only option was to face it head-on. But in his current state, if he were to face such a palm strike head-on, even if he didn't die, he would be gravely injured. Don't kill him! At this moment of life and death, a sudden change occurred. A clear voice abruptly sounded, and a silhouette appeared in midair, blocking in front of Nie Tian. It's her! Nie Tian was stunned for a moment, his eyes narrowed, and he couldn't help but exclaim in shock. He had never imagined that the person who would appear at this time would be Shi family's 8th young miss, Shi Lulan. 8th young miss. The Shi family's martial artists' eyes widened when they saw Shi Lulan's sudden appearance. Stop! Shi Lingfeng was shocked, and his pupils constricted as he shouted, Stop! The Shi family's martial artists reacted immediately, converging their auras, but they couldn't retract the giant palm strike. 8th sister! Shi Lingfeng screamed as he watched Shi Lulan's figure about to be engulfed by the giant palm strike. Boom! However, at this time, a silver-haired figure appeared beside Shi Lulan, emitting a golden light that enveloped Shi Lulan. Chapter 2904. The Patriarch of the Shi family in mid-air. 2 figures fell at an extremely fast speed, like meteors, heavily smashing into the ground. 8th sister! Shi Lingfeng howled as he saw this scene from the sky. His figure flickered as he dove down. The other Shi family cultivators were dazed for a moment, but they quickly reacted and followed after him. But when Shi Lingfeng and the others landed on the ground, they couldn't find any trace of Nie Tian and Shi Lulan. Third young master, we can't find 8th miss and that kid. Could it be that they've already turned to ashes? A Shi family cultivator came to Shi Lingfeng's side and spoke in a heavy voice. But when he saw Shi Lingfeng's dark expression that was almost dripping blood, he didn't dare to say the last 2 words ashes. Everyone in the Shi family knew that Shi Lulan was the Shi family patriarch's most beloved daughter. If Shi Lulan was really dead, then these Shi family cultivators, including Shi Lingfeng, would be in big trouble. Third young master, what should we do now? Another Shi family cultivator asked cautiously as he looked at Shi Lingfeng. Pa! But just as his voice fell, Shi Lingfeng's palm landed on his face. Then, like a wild beast in a cage, Shi Lingfeng roared furiously, "Trash! A bunch of trash!" The others looked at Shi Lingfeng with trepidation, not daring to speak a word. Shi Lingfeng's face was dark and gloomy. After a long time, he said, "No one is allowed to speak of this matter." The Shi family cultivators were dazed for a moment, but then they nodded their heads in agreement. It was obvious that Shi Lingfeng didn't want the Shi family patriarch to know that he had indirectly caused Shi Luolan's death. Shi Lingfeng didn't allow others to speak of this matter because he wanted to explain it to the patriarch personally. And when he reached the patriarch, he would surely have a different story to tell. And these Shi family cultivators, even if they didn't do it on purpose, they were still the ones who had killed Shi Lulan. One could imagine the fear in their hearts. Shi Lingfeng forbade them from speaking of this matter was exactly what they wanted. At this time, what Shi Lingfeng couldn't figure out the most was why Shi Lulan would appear here. And why would she suddenly step forward to save Nietian? Third young master. Just when Shi Lingfeng was puzzled, Shi Tonghu walked over and said tentatively, "I think the 8th young miss and that kid are not dead yet." Not dead? Shi Lingfeng's gaze darkened and he said coldly, "Could a single third-tier demi-saint withstand a combined blow from dozens of demi-saints? And those dozens of demi-saints had even used the power of a formation." The rest of the Shi family's martial artists also looked at Shi Tonghu with hostility. When Shi Tonghu said that Nietian was still alive, he was obviously looking down on them. Third young master, an ordinary demi-saint or even a demi-saint would not be able to withstand the combined attacks of so many demi-saints from the Shi family. Shi Tonghu's eyes flickered, but he did not retreat. Instead, he continued, "But that kid's strength is not ordinary at all. Speak clearly." Shi Lingfeng's gaze sharpened and he said coldly. Shi Tonghu nodded and said, "Third young master, you have fought against that kid before. You know better than me how bizarre his strength is and how powerful his martial body is. Even if that palm strike could have killed him, it would not have been enough to turn him into dust. At most, it would have shattered his martial body. But now there is no scent of blood around, and the nearby Manjusaka is not open. That is why your subordinate believes that the kid is not dead, and that he has escaped with the 8th young miss." Shi Lingfeng's gaze sharpened as he listened to Shi Tonghu's words, and he soon fell into deep thought. Shi Tonghu was right. Nietian's martial body was certainly perversely tough, and he was fine even after being struck by so many hurricane blades. A combined palm strike from dozens of Shi family warriors would definitely not have turned him into dust. Moreover, at that moment, the Shi family warriors had stopped their attack in time. The giant palm strike did not have any follow-up force, and its true strength could not have been too strong. "Don't tell me that kid is really not dead?" Shi Lingfeng calmed down when he thought of this. A cold light flashed in his eyes, and his killing intent was heavy. Shi Luolan's matter had made him panic, and he did not think too much about it. Now, it seemed that Nietian and Shi Luolan were not dead and had escaped. Damn it! After a while, Shi Lingfeng confirmed that Nietian was indeed not dead. His eyes trembled and he let out a low roar. Then, he calmed down and ordered the other Shi family warriors to stand guard here, while he and Shi Tonghu returned to the Cloudy Buddha Peak. As for Tai Chingfeng and the others, they had already escaped without a trace when the situation turned bad. The Shi family warriors' attention was completely focused on Nietian, and they did not pay any attention to Tai Chingfeng and the others. Half an hour later, in the depths of the Cloudy Buddha Peak, above the Cloudy Buddha main hall, Shi Lingfeng stood in the main hall, bowing deeply and reverently. Beside him, Shi Tonghu knelt on the ground, not daring to raise his head, and remained motionless. In front of the two was a burly middle-aged man, standing on the high platform in the main hall with his back facing them. After a long time, the middle-aged man slowly turned around, revealing a firm and cold face. He looked to be in his 40s or 50s, and his eyes were as deep as the sea, as if they hid the world's darkest secrets. His aura was restrained to the extreme, but it still could not conceal his powerful momentum. This was a false saint expert, and the only false saint expert in the entire Sea of Suffering. The Sea of Suffering's restriction was so strong that even the cloudy Buddha-Shur family with their Manjusaka couldn't completely break it. Being able to reach the false saint realm in the Sea of Suffering's cliff was already an astonishing feat. This man was the Shur family's current patriarch, Shi Donglai. At this time, Shi Donglai's face was as gloomy as still water, obviously thinking about something. "Ling Feng, is what you said true?" Shi Donglai asked after a while. He stared at Shi Lingfeng with a heavy gaze. "Father, what I said just now is absolutely true. Shi Tonghu can testify, and many of the Shi family's cultivators saw that scene." Shi Lingfeng nodded heavily. He told Shi Donglai about Nie Tian's matter. "This person's blood is actually so strong that he can stimulate the Manjusaka to open with just his blood qi. It's really frightening," Shi Donglai said solemnly, his eyes gradually becoming firm and cold. He then looked at Shi Lingfeng and said, "Lingfeng, pass down my order to search for this silver-haired cultivator. We must capture him at all costs. Moreover, we must capture him alive." "Father, Eighth Sister is still with this person. If this person threatens us with Eighth Sister, what should we do?" Shi Lingfeng's eyes darkened slightly as he said cautiously, "Try not to hurt Eighth Sister." Shi Donglai paused for a moment, then said in a heavy tone, "Understood." Shi Lingfeng froze for a moment, then nodded in reply. Shi Donglai said, "Try your best," implying that if necessary, Shi Liulan's life could also be placed on the back burner. Shi Lingfeng hadn't expected that his father would even disregard Shi Liulan's life in order to capture Nie Tian. Shi Lingfeng didn't delay and directly walked out of the hall. Chapter 2905. The Cruel Truth. In the dense forest of the Cloud Buddha mountain range, two figures were shuttling back and forth at high speed. They were none other than Nie Tian and Shi Liulan. Soon, the two of them arrived outside a valley and entered it in a flicker. This place should be safe now. Nie Tian probed the surroundings with his spiritual sense, making sure there was no one around. He exhaled a long breath of turbid air and said, Previously, Shi Liulan had stepped forward to save Nie Tian's life at the brink of death. But in the next moment it was Nie Tian who saved her. Fortunately, the group of Shi family cultivators had stopped their attack at the last moment, greatly reducing the force of their attack. Otherwise, Nie Tian would have been severely injured. Right now, he had only suffered some minor injuries and was not a big deal. Are you alright? Shi Liulan looked at Nie Tian, her big eyes glimmering as she asked timidly. I'm fine. Nie Tian smiled faintly. He could tell at a glance that Shi Liulan rarely talked to others. She was the kind of girl who rarely spoke loudly. Why did you save me? Shi Liulan's eyes glimmered when she saw that Nie Tian was really fine. Nie Tian chuckled and said, Eighth young miss, shouldn't I be asking you this question? Shi Liulan was taken aback, her pretty face stiffened. It was true that she had saved Nie Tian first, and then Nie Tian had saved her. Eighth young miss, why did you save me? In the next moment, Nie Tian's expression turned solemn as he asked in a deep voice. Although Shi Liulan was as innocent as a child, the two of them were still on opposite sides at the moment. Nie Tian was indeed curious why Shi Liulan had saved him at the last moment. Your sword intent tells me that you're a good person. Shi Liulan's eyes glimmered as if she was trying to avoid something. Good person? Nie Tian couldn't help but laugh hearing this. I don't even remember how many people I've killed. Moreover, I've just killed a Sure family cultivator. You've only fought with me once, and just based on my sword intent, you think I'm a good person. Do you believe such a reason? Sure, Lulan might be naive, but she was definitely not stupid. A person's sword intent could naturally reflect a person's character. But for a swordsman like Sure Lulan, who could not even be considered as a fledgling swordsman, it was impossible for her to kill someone with her sword consciousness. Moreover, Sure Lulan's eyes were avoiding his gaze. Clearly, she was hiding something. Sure Lulan's eyes flickered. She wanted to say something, but she swallowed her words. Eighth lady, what do you want to say? Just say it. Nia Tian said with a faint smile. Yes. Sure Lulan nodded, as if she had made a great decision, and said, I feel that you are the person I am looking for. Nia Tian's eyes narrowed and his face stiffened. He smiled and said, Eighth young lady, your words are a bit confusing. I don't quite understand. The person he was looking for? Destined person? Nia Tian really didn't understand. If Sure Lulan really meant that, he would find it very troublesome. Nia Tian admitted that Sure Lulan was very beautiful, but she was definitely not his type. What I mean is, you are the person my teacher asked me to find. Sure Lulan's eyes flickered as she said. Nia Tian's eyebrows furrowed and he went blank again. Who was Sure Lulan's teacher? Why was she looking for him? Do you have a string of prayer beads on you? Sure Lulan looked at Nia Tian and asked softly. Nia Tian's eyes narrowed. With a flip of his palm, a string of prayer beads appeared in his hand. Sure Lulan's beautiful eyes quivered when she saw the prayer beads in Nia Tian's hand. She shouted excitedly, That's it! Nia Tian's face sank. He stared blankly at the prayer beads. This string of prayer beads was given to him by Huairu before he left. According to Huairu, this string of prayer beads came from a member of the Cloud Buddha Sure family. If necessary, the prayer beads would be of help to Nia Tian. Nia Tian hadn't taken out the prayer beads because he wanted to use them at a critical moment. He hadn't expected that the owner of the prayer beads would take the initiative to find him. Sure Lulan rarely came out, focusing on her cultivation. This time, she had come out on her teacher's order to find a person with prayer beads. In truth, she wasn't sure if Nia Tian was the person she was looking for. Her intuition told her that Nia Tian was the person she was looking for. Your teacher is the owner of the prayer beads? Nia Tian looked at Sure Lulan and asked with a faint smile. Sure Lulan nodded heavily. Teacher told me to bring you to him immediately after I find you. He also asked you if you know the truth about the scarlet blood sacrificial array. The truth. Nia Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. He nodded in understanding. Sure Lulan's eyes quivered when she saw Nia Tian nod. She said, Teacher said to tell me if you know the truth. Tell you? Nia Tian was stunned for a moment before he smiled. Do you really want to know? Previously, Nia Tian had already discovered that Sure Lulan didn't know anything about the scarlet blood sacrificial array. Sure Lulan nodded heavily with a solemn expression. She thought that the scarlet blood sacrificial array was the blood and sweat of the Sure family's ancestors. It was used to open the path to the scarlet blood sacred world. However, she didn't know the method to open the path to the scarlet blood sacred world. She was curious as to why Nia Tian and the others would suddenly appear at the Cloudy Buddha Peak. The entire Cloudy Buddha Sea was a forbidden area of the Sea of Bitterness. For countless years, no outsider had ever been able to enter the Cloudy Buddha Peak. How did Nia Tian and the others manage to enter the Cloudy Buddha Peak? You must be wondering why we came back to the Cloudy Buddha Peak, right? Nia Tian chuckled. Actually, this is a trap set up by your Sure family's ancestors. We came to the Cloudy Buddha Peak to be the sacrificial offerings for the scarlet blood sacrificial array. Sacrificial offerings? What do you mean? Sure Lulan was startled. Her eyes flickered with a puzzled expression. She couldn't understand what Nia Tian was talking about. Nia Tian shook his head and smiled bitterly. It seemed like Sure Lulan really didn't know anything. Next, he told her the cruel truth about the scarlet blood sacrificial array without hiding anything. Shirlyolan's face stiffened when she heard Nietion's words. She was speechless for a long time. She didn't expect that the scarlet blood sacrificial array required blood sacrifices. Using blood to activate the red spider lily's power and open the path to the scarlet blood sacred world was the truth. Eighth young miss, are you all right? Nietion couldn't help taking a step forward and asking when he saw Shirlyolan's dazed expression. To a little girl like Shirlulan who had yet to experience worldly affairs, the scarlet blood sacrificial array was indeed very cruel. Shirlulan had always thought that opening the path to the scarlet blood sacred world was the Cloudy Buddha family's business. She had never imagined that so many people would be sacrificed for it. She couldn't accept such a truth. No, I must stop, father. Shirlyolan's eyes trembled as she said agitatedly a moment later. Nietion smiled bitterly and shook his head. The Cloudy Buddha family had prepared the scarlet blood sacrificial array for a long time. So what if they sacrificed a few hundred lives? Nietion guessed that even if the entire Sea of Bitterness cliff was sacrificed, the Cloudy Buddha family's patriarch wouldn't stop. I'm going to find father, Shirlulan said impulsively and prepared to leave.